Maria was an ordinary young woman with a popular Instagram account. She had around 5,000 followers, which is a decent amount. Because of this, she naturally received a lot of attention on her profile, mostly from men who stumbled across her photos. Maria was in a committed relationship, but she chose to keep her boyfriend off her public page. None of her pictures featured him, so she appeared completely single to the outside world. Maria also had her Snapchat username right there in her Instagram bio. It makes it incredibly easy for friends to find you, but it also opens a massive door for unwanted contact from strangers. At first, Maria had her privacy settings completely open. This meant anyone could send her direct messages and pictures, even if she had not added them back. Naturally, she would often receive random snaps from guys she did not know. Most of the time, these came from older, creepy-looking men who had clearly found her through Instagram. Even the younger guys who messaged her had a way of looking incredibly creepy in their photos, taking weirdly angled selfies in dark rooms. For a long time, these messages were just annoying but relatively harmless. But one day, Maria received a snap that changed everything. Maria lived with her family, but she spent a lot of her time staying at her boyfriend's apartment. It was a first-floor apartment, and this location was not public knowledge. Only her closest friends knew she had a boyfriend, let alone where he lived. This is what made the snap she received so deeply disturbing. One afternoon, Maria was lying in her boyfriend's bed, taking a nap. Her boyfriend was out in the living room watching a football game on television. It was a completely normal, relaxing day. But during this exact time, someone was standing right outside the bedroom window. This person held up their phone and took a photo through the glass. In the photo, which was taken in the dark, you could just barely make out Maria sleeping in the bed. There was no caption or text. It was sent to her Snapchat as a direct, silent message. It was a subtle and terrifying threat, but Maria did not even see the snap when it first arrived. It was not until much later in the night that she finally sat down to go through her snaps. By the time she opened it, several hours had already passed since the photo was taken. As soon as Maria saw the image of herself sleeping, she panicked. She immediately took a screenshot of the snap to save the evidence and ran to show her boyfriend. He was deeply alarmed. He took her phone and decided to reply to the mysterious account, asking who they were. To get a response, they had to add the account back. When they did, they noticed the account had an incredibly high snap score, which was somewhere in the 50,000 range. A score that high meant this was not a brand new fake account. This was someone's main active account. After a few moments, the person replied. They simply wrote the name John, followed by the letters LOL. Maria's boyfriend did not find it funny at all. He replied back stating that they were calling the police. John replied with a highly confident and mocking message, telling them that was cool, and even asking if they needed help calling them. Right after sending that message, the account blocked Maria. The line of communication went dead. That same night, as the couple tried to go to sleep, a loud, violent crash from the living room shattered the silence of the night. Maria's boyfriend jumped out of bed and rushed to find the source of the noise. In the dining area, he saw shattered glass covering the floor. The dining room window had been completely smashed, and lying right there was a heavy house brick. It was later presumed that the perpetrator had taken the brick from a nearby house that was currently undergoing renovations. The situation had escalated from a creepy digital message to a physical, violent attack on their home. They immediately called 911 to report the incident. Once the police arrived, they took a formal report. A detective was officially assigned to the case. The plan was for the police to subpoena Snapchat for the account details, but as the days slowly turned into weeks, they received little to no information from the police. It soon became clear that the Snapchat account had been deleted. Currently, Maria and her boyfriend still have absolutely no idea who this person was. The next story takes us to the state of Kentucky, where a college student named Tom was attending the University of Kentucky. Tom was a typical college kid who loved hanging out with his friends. Like many of his peers, Tom used a popular feature on Snapchat called the Snap Map. This feature allows your friends to see your exact real-time location on a map represented by your customized digital avatar, known as a Bitmoji. While this feature can be convenient for meeting up with friends, it also carries a massive safety risk. Tom lived in a house located just off campus with 4 of his close friends. Their house was situated in a busy downtown area that was surrounded by several local bars. On the weekends, the group of guys would routinely walk to and from these bars to enjoy their nights out. The night of this incident was no exception. Tom was on his way home from a nearby college bar. The walk from the bar to his house usually took about 15 minutes. As he walked, the bustling sounds of the downtown area began to fade away. At some point during his walk, Tom found himself on a quiet residential street. On one side of the road, there was a thick area of dark woods, making the street feel even more isolated. As he walked, he suddenly heard footsteps shuffling on the pavement behind him. Tom turned around and saw a man walking about 10 meters behind him. The man was holding his arms straight out, clutching some kind of object. Because it was dark, Tom could not make out what he was holding. He did not want to stare or draw negative attention, so he quickly turned back around and kept walking. Still, something about the sight of this stranger felt incredibly ominous. The man followed Tom for a significant distance. Tom kept walking, his heart beating faster, until he finally turned onto the block with his house on it. At that point, Tom looked back and noticed the man was no longer behind him. He felt a wave of relief, assuming the stranger had turned off. Tom made it back inside his house safely, believing the strange encounter was finally over. Just after Tom stepped inside his house and closed the door, his phone buzzed. He saw a notification that he had just received a Snapchat message from his friend and housemate, Luke. This was extremely confusing because Luke was actually home at the time, but he had lost his phone earlier that night. If Luke did not have his phone, it meant someone else was actively using his Snapchat account. Sensing that something was deeply wrong, Tom did not open the snap immediately. Instead, he called his other housemates downstairs so they could all look at it together. Before opening the message, Tom turned on his phone's screen recorder to ensure they captured whatever it was. When they finally opened the snap, they were completely shocked. The snap was a video of Tom himself walking down the dark street towards their house. It had been filmed by the exact man Tom had seen walking behind him earlier. The object the man had been holding was actually Luke's stolen phone. He had been recording Tom's walk home in real time. The realization that a stranger was following Tom with their friend's stolen phone sent a wave of panic through the house. The guys quickly realized that they could use the snap map to see where Luke's phone was, since Luke had his location sharing enabled. They opened the map and looked at Luke's Bitmoji. The map showed that the location had been updated just 9 minutes ago, and the icon was sitting right on top of their house. The 3 guys who were currently home decided to act. They turned on all the outside lights of the house, illuminating the front yard, the backyard, and the driveway. They ran outside and searched the entire property, looking behind bushes and in the dark corners of the yard. They did not find anyone, but as they stood outside, they checked the snap map again. Oddly enough, Luke's Bitmoji moved just a tiny bit as the location updated once more. It was still showing that the phone was right on top of their house. This meant that whoever had the phone had to be somewhere they were completely overlooking. After searching the yard for a while with no success, the guys decided to try a different tactic. They used the Find My iPhone feature on another device to lock Luke's phone and force it to play a loud, continuous beeping sound. To their absolute horror, they did not hear the sound coming from outside in the yard. Instead, they heard the distinct, muffled beeping of the phone coming from inside their own house. A second later, the quiet house was filled with the heavy stomping of someone running, followed by the loud, violent slam of the front door. The intruder had been inside the house the entire time. Instead of stopping to look for the phone, the 3 guys immediately sprinted out the front door to chase after the person. But by the time they made it out onto the street, the intruder was completely gone. He had vanished into the darkness of the neighborhood. They eventually went back inside to retrieve Luke's still beeping phone. They followed the sound and found it lying right inside the kitchen pantry closet. This meant the stranger had been hiding in that small pantry closet for however long, listening to them talk. The final story takes place in Australia in 2015. An Australian Redditor named Skinner555 posted 3 Snapchat videos of his parents' exotic birds that would soon spark a massive online mystery. Skinner and his girlfriend had recently moved into his childhood home to live with his parents while their own house was being built. One night, while Skinner was completely home alone, he uploaded 3 Snapchat stories showing off the birds. In the first video, he introduced a little cockatiel bird named Leo. In the second, he showed off a beautiful rainbow lorikeet named Oliver. In the third video, Skinner filmed himself sitting in the quiet living room with their third bird, a friendly parrot named Puffin. It seemed like a normal, wholesome series of videos. About 15 minutes after uploading the videos, Skinner received a text from a friend asking what was in the window behind him in the last video. Skinner went to rewatch the clips on his computer to get a clearer view. As he analyzed the footage, his stomach dropped. In the background of the final snap, behind where he was sitting, there was a glass door. In the window, you could see a figure standing outside in the dark with their hands cupped against the glass, looking directly inside. What made this even more terrifying was that in the first video, when that same glass door was in full frame, there was absolutely nobody there. Whatever it was had arrived at the door in the brief moments between the first and third videos. Skinner was home alone, and that glass door led to the backyard, which was locked. The figure could not be a reflection because the sliding glass door was half open, with only a mesh screen door in place. This incident triggered a terrifying childhood memory for Skinner. From age 10, he had suffered from sleep paralysis, where he frequently saw a faceless person looking in his window with hands cupped to the glass. This had stopped when he moved out, but now it was happening in real life. A few days later, Skinner was again home alone on a Friday night playing video games. Suddenly, he heard loud banging coming from the screen door. He grabbed his phone and started filming. Instead of opening the curtains, Skinner turned on the outside lights and looked through a side window. He heard a loud crash on the opposite side of the house. He kept all the lights on until his parents came home. Later, Redditors enhanced the video and revealed a dark figure in the corner of the dining room that was not there at the end of the video. The police believed a 2-man robbery team had targeted the house. One broke in, and when he realized Skinner was home, the second made noise outside to draw him out so the first could escape. However, Skinner remained skeptical because all doors and windows were locked from the inside. The mystery of what actually happened that night remains unsolved. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time. See ya. I joined a gym for the first time 3 months ago. A gym is really the last place you would ever expect something scary to happen. But last week I had the most horrific experience of my life. I wear wireless headphones when I go to the gym because the wired ones always get in the way, and they are just annoying. Sometimes I will leave my phone on a workout machine when I walk to the water fountain, and when the phone gets too far from the headphones start getting staticky before disconnecting. I only knew because it happened a couple of times before, when I walked away too far from my phone in the gym. Well, one late night last week, I was one of the last people still in the gym. I was on one of the seated leg machines. I began my set of 20. While I was pushing towards my final reps, the music in my headphones started getting staticky. That is how my headset said disconnected from phone. I stopped my set and reached over to the phone compartment on top of the machine, and I filled with worry when I could not feel my phone. It was not there. I looked around the gym desperately, thinking someone might have taken it. I only saw 2 other people in the whole gym, excluding the guy sitting at the front desk. One guy was really fat and sweaty, and the other guy was sitting on one of the machines looking down on his phone. Which one could have taken my phone? I had to approach the guy sitting on his phone as much as I did not want to. He had earbuds in, so when I approached him, he looked at me with a confused look on his face. He took one earbud out and looked at me, and I firmly asked him if he took my phone. He looked at me in silence for a couple of seconds, then said no. There was obvious attitude. I asked him if he saw anyone else walking by recently, and he just shook his head no. For some dumb reason, I said thanks and walked away, when deep down I wanted to tell him to quit being a jerk. I went to the front desk and asked the worker to check the video cameras and see once and for all who actually took my phone. The worker turned the computer screen so that I could see it, and clicked play on a video which showed the guy who left 15 seconds ago taking my phone. I I thanked the employee and ran to catch the guy who just left. But by the time I got outside, the guy was nowhere to be found. The scary thing that sunk in right away was the fact that I recently disabled my passcode blocks on my phone, meaning he had access to all of my apps, all of my texts, pictures, emails, and all of my data. I went back inside and asked the employee to track that man's membership info. But when he checked the cameras, the guy did not even check in. He simply walked past the counter unnoticed. So, there were no records of this guy even being a member of the gym. The footage showed that he suspiciously walked around between machines, looking around a lot like a nervous person. I asked the employee to report that to the police. He said he would show it to his boss tomorrow. The next day, I called my best friend Tom so I could tell him why I would not be answering texts for a while, and to also see if he could tell all my other friends what happened. He started freaking out on the phone, begging me to tell him I was kidding about losing it. He told me someone had been sending him texts and came to his house. I did not understand, so he said he would be over to show me. 10 minutes later, Tom got to my house and showed me a long conversation between him and someone using my phone pretending to be me. It started out with the person on my phone saying, "Hey, can I stay at your place tonight? I got in a huge fight with my parents." Tom said, "Yeah, let me know when you come over." Then the guy who was using my phone said, "Can you just leave your back door open? I am going to be over super late and I do not want to wake you." The conversation went on a little while longer before Tom finally agreed to just leave his back door unlocked. Tom went back to sleep under the impression that it was actually me who would be coming through that back door. When we finished reading the conversation, Tom looked up at me and said, "The cameras." We rushed to his house together and watched the footage captured on the cameras throughout his house. I was disturbed, but also not surprised to see that man from the gym who took my phone walking in through the back door of Tom's house. He scavenges the place, grabbing expensive household objects and throwing them in his pockets. He moves from the den to the kitchen and eventually to the upstairs. I saw the fear in Tom's face when we watched the man on the camera on the upstairs hallway open his bedroom door, step inside for about 20 seconds, and come back out, leaving the door open. The man was in the house for about 10 minutes before sneaking back out the back door. It looked like he took a lot of valuables. Tom and I sent the video footage to the police. 3 months later, we have not heard a word from them. Whoever stole my phone and snuck into Tom's house got away with it. I currently go to a 24-hour gym in my town. It is usually on the quieter side most of the day, but during the night hours, it really becomes a ghost town. I do not quite understand how they could afford to stay open 24/7. I had to work late one night to cover for someone else's shift, so I got off work at 11 p.m. I planned on heading right over to the gym to get a quick midnight workout in. When I got there, nobody else was there. I was the only one working out. Well, only for about 10 minutes, and then I finally spotted someone else working out. It made me feel a little less odd for being there so late. The guy was wearing a beanie and a hoodie. I was sweating just looking at him, to be honest. I mean, yeah, it was cold out, but it was not cold in the gym. I barely had enough time to analyze his odd clothing decision before he started staring me down. I looked back for as long as I felt comfortable before deciding to look away. I felt like he seemed to be challenging my dominance, because I still felt his stare through my peripheral vision. I kept shooting brief looks back at him to still find him staring at me. I tried my best to ignore it and went on with my workout. I just could not take the staring anymore though, so I went to a different section of the gym where there was absolutely no one around. I was finally able to work out in peace. I was doing bicep curls by the free weights while facing the mirror. That is when I noticed it. That guy in the beanie was hiding behind one of the chest press machines. There was a slight opening between the lifting mechanism and the actual weights on the machine, and through that opening was the guy's face once again staring at me. I think when he realized that I noticed him, he moved away out of sight behind the machine. I am way too timid of a person to go approach anybody like that, so instead of confronting him, I put the weights down and left the room. I walked straight to the front desk and asked the girl working to tell the man to either stop staring at me like that or to leave the gym. She looked down the aisle of workout machines and saw nobody. I asked her to come follow me. She was clearly very reluctant to do so, but she ended up coming with me to the back room. We looked around the room, but he was not in there. In fact, it seemed like he was not even in the gym anymore. I apologized and told her to keep an eye out for the man in the beanie. She walked back to her desk, and I kept working out for another 10 to 15 minutes. I waved goodbye to the girl as I left the gym and went to my car. As I put the key in the door lock, I heard manic footsteps hitting the concrete. I was confused at first because it sounded like somebody running in my direction. I turned 180 degrees, and someone was sprinting towards me from the dark. I stood like an animal frozen in headlights for a second as I stared in shock. When the person emerged into the circle of light under the light post I was parked under, I was able to instantly recognize the guy in the beanie and hoodie from earlier. I opened the car door and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I slammed my hand down on that tiny lock knob on top of the door handle a split second before the man tried to open the door. As I started the car, he started to kick at my door and window. I threw the handle into reverse and stepped on the gas. The car jolted backwards away from the man, and I was able to escape the parking lot safely. I got home and found a bunch of dents in my door from the man's kicks. Admittedly, I should have called the cops or even the gym and warned the girl of the man, now that she was alone. Instead, I selfishly just went to bed and told myself I would never go to the gym late at night again. I used to work nights at a 24-hour fitness center in New Jersey. I had a love-hate relationship with these shifts. I loved it because very few people would come in during the deep night hours, meaning less people checking in and less weights I had to put back. I hated it because it meant I had to spend the graveyard hours sitting at a desk doing nothing while everybody else was asleep. Still, maybe you would think many strange things would happen during these hours, or maybe you wouldn't. It is a gym, so what could really happen? Actually, only one strange incident ever happened while I was working there. I was sitting in a chair behind the counter reading a magazine, and then out of natural curiosity, I turned to do a little people watching. Well, there was only one guy in the gym. He was not doing anything, though. He was kind of just pacing slowly down the gym, looking around. He made a left turn past the wall and disappeared from my view. So, it was back to reading for me. 10 minutes passed, and I forgot the guy was even there. Then suddenly, everything went dark and completely silence. Like literally, the power in the gym just shut out. All the lights turned off, and all the music went dead. It was so dark I could not see 2 feet in front of me. Thank God our phones have flashlights these days. Otherwise, I would not have known what to do. I turned my flashlight on and tried to think of what I should do next. I knew some kind of power box was in one of the storage rooms connected to the back section of the gym. I also knew that was exactly where the one guy working out happened to be. On my way there, with my phone flashlight in hand, I called out for the patron over and over. Now I was in the back section, still calling for him. Why on earth would he not answer me? There was something so eerie about being in a silent, pitch-black gym and seeing all the workout equipment only through a flashlight. I found the power box in the back storage area, or at least what I thought was the power box. I tried flicking on and off every possible combination of switches, but the power did not come back on. Since I could not figure it out, I guessed it was on me to close up shop and wait for Kathy, the owner, to come fix it tomorrow morning. But first, I had to find that guy. I did a thorough scan of the whole back section, behind all the equipment and all the janitorial closets, but found nothing. The only other place I could check back there was the women's bathroom. I opened the door and called for him once more. My voice echoed into the seemingly empty bathroom. Still, I had to double check to confirm. I made sure to point the flashlight in every possible direction so I could see every inch of the bathroom. The only place left to check now was the stalls. Before I could open either of them, though, I started to hear noises. It was breathing noises, like sickly, deranged breathing noises. I had my hand on the door ready to push it open, but I could not bring myself to do it. I said, "Are you in there?" No answer. I got on my knees and looked under the stall door with my flashlight. There were 2 legs standing right behind the stall door, practically inches from my face. He was literally standing on the other side of the stall door. I quickly got up and left the room, my heart racing. I ran to the front desk and tried to figure out what to do. I tried calling the owner, also known as my boss, but obviously she was asleep by this time. I left 2 different voicemails on her phone. The only other thing I could think to do was call the cops, and so I did. I did not know what else to say other than there was a suspicious man in our gym, and I was 90% sure he had somehow cut the power. I hung up the phone and felt alone and horrified in the darkness and silence. Suddenly, a metallic hit sound came from across the dark gym, like one of the machine's weights being dropped. I shone the light down the gym and called for the patron once more, and then called out that we were closed and that he had to leave. Then, I think I saw him. I saw someone walking between two machines before getting too far from the light to see. It seemed like he was messing with me now. I shone the light in the direction that he was walking, and I swear to God it looked like just at the edge of the light, there was a face looking at me. The blue and red lights from the cop car outside lit up the front section of the gym briefly. A cop knocked on the front door, and I opened it to let him in. He took out his flashlight, greeted me, and said he would take a look around. He patrolled the whole entire gym, including bathrooms and closets, before coming back to me and saying it was empty. He suggested that whoever it was left through the back door, and that is exactly what I did. By the time I got back the next morning to check on things, Kathy was already there. Apparently, it was just a simple power outage the night previous. Kathy and I checked the camera footage together. In those brief moments before the power went out, we checked for the guy I described, but he was not there. There was no footage of him entering the gym. Kathy looked at me like I was crazy and asked if I was alone, but I was too frozen with shock and confusion to care. I swore up and down to her that someone was there that night. To this day, I do not know if she believed me. I do not even know what to think of that night, but I know I saw someone there, regardless of what the cameras might have shown. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. I work at a game development company in Orlando, Florida. It was a stressful couple of weeks for me, and I was really pressed for time. We had a major game deadline coming up very soon, and there was still so much work left to do. Because of this, I had to stay at the office late almost every single night that week. It was exhausting, but it was just part of the job. On one particular night, it was a rainy Wednesday. Outside, it was completely pitch black. The only light came from the occasional strike of lightning that would suddenly light up the parking lot and the surrounding trees. The sound of the rain pouring heavily against my office window was actually quite soothing. It was helping me concentrate on my coding. At this point, there was only one other person left in the entire office. This was my coworker, a guy named Chas. He was also finishing up his work for the night. He was under the exact same strict deadline as me, so he was just as stressed. By the time we were getting close to finishing, it was easily between 8 and 9 o'clock in the evening. Chas walked over to my office and knocked on my open door. He told me that he was heading out for the night. He asked if I was going to be okay locking up the place by myself. I looked up from my screen, smiled, and told him that of course I would be fine. He nodded, wished me luck, and walked away. A few seconds later, I heard the heavy front door of our company office slam shut. And just like that, I was completely alone in the building. Our entire office layout is shaped like a giant letter L. The main entrance is at one far end of the L, and my private office is located all the way down the short line of the letter. Basically, I had the corner office at the very end of the hall. As the night went on, I started to feel incredibly tired. My eyes were getting heavy, and I had to keep myself awake. I decided to get up and go down the hall to the kitchen to heat up some coffee. I did not want a full cup, just a little bit of caffeine to keep me focused for one more hour. I walked down the quiet, dimly lit hallway and entered the kitchen. I poured some coffee into a mug and put it in the microwave. As I leaned against the counter, waiting for the timer to count down, I heard a distinct sound. It was the sound of a door closing. I immediately froze. I peeked my head out into the hallway to see if anyone was there. The office was quiet except for the sound of the rain outside. I called out to see if someone had come back, but there was no reply. The sound of the door closing did not sound like the heavy front entrance door. It sounded like one of the smaller private office doors. I left the kitchen and walked down the two main hallways, checking the doors as I went. Every single one of them was locked tight. Then I walked back down toward my own little hallway. When I got there, I noticed something strange. All three of the doors in my hallway were completely shut. This included the door to my own office. This immediately made me nervous. I knew for a fact that I had left my office door wide open when I went to the kitchen. I was 1000% sure of it. There was absolutely no draft in the building because all the windows were closed tight. The air conditioning was not running hard enough to blow a heavy wooden door shut. I immediately thought that someone must still be in the office. I thought maybe Chaz or another coworker was playing a prank on me. I grabbed the handle of my office door and pushed it open with a lot of force. I fully expected someone to jump out and scare me. But when the door swung open, the room was completely empty. Everything was exactly how I had left it. My chair, my computer, and my papers were all untouched. It was very odd, but I tried to brush it off. I sat back down at my desk and went back to work. The rain kept hitting the window, and lightning continued to flash about once every minute. It actually startled me a few times because the room would suddenly bright up and then go dark. Some more time passed, and it was getting very late. I was finally satisfied with the progress I had made on my code. I saved all of my files and decided it was time to shut down for the night. I clicked the shutdown button on my computer and then turned off the monitor. The screen went completely black, and that is when my heart dropped into my stomach. In the black reflection of my computer screen, I saw a woman standing directly behind me. I did not scream and I did not jump. I was too terrified to move. My body went completely cold. I knew that if I turned around, I would have to face whatever was behind me. So, I tried to stay as calm as possible. I stood up from my desk, grabbed my keys and my bag, and pretended like I had not seen anything at all. I walked straight to the door without looking back. Once I cleared the doorway, I walked quickly down the hall. As soon as I got close to the main exit, I started running. I bolted out the door, ran down the stairs to the first floor, and burst out into the pouring rain. I ran all the way to my car and jumped inside, locking the doors immediately. I took a few deep breaths to try and calm my racing heart. Then I looked up at the window of my second-floor office. The light was still on. As I stared at the window, I noticed a small movement in the blinds. It looked like someone was parting the slats, looking down at me in the parking lot. I immediately called my boss, Miranda. I explained the situation to her, and she confirmed that absolutely nobody else should have been in the building. She told me she would call the night security guard and ask him to check the office. Later that night, Miranda called me back. She said the security guard went up to our office and searched the entire place, but he did not find anyone. I told her again exactly what I had seen in the reflection of my screen, and it freaked her out too. But the strangest part of all was the security camera. We only had one camera in our entire office, and it was positioned at the end of the long hallway near the kitchen. When they reviewed the footage from that night, they never saw any woman walk past the camera. It was as if she had appeared in my office out of thin air, and vanished just as quickly. That experience was incredibly unsettling, but it shows how empty office buildings can feel like completely different places at night. This next story took place a long time ago in Midtown Manhattan. The narrator of this story was working as a security guard in a large office building. It was the middle of November, so the building was relatively quiet. One of the offices on the upper floors was getting ready to decorate for the holidays, and they needed to retrieve their Christmas decorations from the basement storage area. The security guard usually spent his shifts standing in the main lobby. It was a very simple, uneventful job, but on this cold Monday, everything changed. An employee from a dermatology office on one of the upper floors came to the lobby and reported a problem. They said that they had gone down to the basement to look for some supplies, but all the lights were completely out. They also mentioned that the elevator was not running to the basement level, and that several doors down there appeared to be broken. They suspected that someone might have broken into the building over the weekend. Since the guard was the only security officer on duty that day, it was his job to go down and investigate. Because the elevator was not working for the basement level, he had to take the stairs. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and started heading down. He was not happy about going down there alone. The basement of this Manhattan building was massive. It was a dark, confusing maze of concrete corridors, electrical rooms, and storage spaces for all the different businesses in the building. Navigating this space in the pitch black with nothing but a flashlight was incredibly tense. As he walked deeper into the basement, he realized the employee was right. Several of the heavy storage doors had been completely smashed in. Some of them were so badly damaged that it looked like someone had used an axe or a sledgehammer to break them open. This was not a simple case of a small break-in. This looked like a violent destruction of property. He peered into a few of the damaged rooms with his flashlight, but to his surprise, nothing seemed to be missing. All the boxes and office supplies were still stacked inside. It did not make sense. Suddenly, a loud slam echoed through the basement. Immediately after the slam, all the usual background noises of the basement went dead silent. The hum of the boiler, the rushing of water in the pipes, everything just stopped. The silence was deafening. The guard knew that someone else had to be down there with him. He made the mistake of calling out, asking if anyone was there. His voice just echoed down the empty concrete hallway. He decided right then and there that he was not staying. He turned around and began to walk back toward the stairs. He was almost to the stairwell when he heard a sound that made him freeze. It was the sound of heavy, labored breathing. It was coming from right around the next corner. The guard was absolutely terrified. He quickly clicked off his flashlight so he would not be seen. He took a few quiet steps closer to the corner to try and see who was there. The breathing suddenly stopped. He whispered a quiet hello, and when there was no answer, he clicked his flashlight back on. Even though the beam of his light was not pointed directly around the corner, the ambient light was enough to reveal a terrifying sight. Standing right there was an extremely tall, hunched-over figure. The figure was facing the wall and was holding a long, heavy object that looked like a weapon. The person was easily over 6.5 feet tall. When the light hit the wall, the figure slowly turned its head. The guard saw an abnormally long, pale face. The person was completely bald. The guard did not wait to see anything else. He turned and sprinted past the corner, heading straight for the stairs. As he ran, he screamed back at the figure, telling him that the police were on their way and that he needed to leave. He ran up the stairs, burst through the door into the main building, locked the door behind him, and called 911. Within minutes, several police cars arrived. 4 officers went down into the basement to search for the intruder. The guard waited in the lobby, feeling completely helpless. Dealing with a giant armed intruder in a pitch-black basement was definitely not what he was being paid for. After a thorough search, the officers came back up empty-handed. They could not find the man anywhere. An electrician was called to fix the power in the basement. It turned out that someone had intentionally tampered with the main circuit box, cutting off the lights and disabling the elevator access to that floor. The police believed the intruder must have escaped through one of the other emergency stairwells that led directly out to the street. The security guard was so shaken up by the encounter that he took several sick days. For weeks, he lay awake at night, constantly checking the dark corners of his bedroom, terrified that he would see that giant, pale figure standing in the shadows. But perhaps the most bizarre and unexplainable office encounter happened in the year 2002. This took place in Makati, a major business district in the Philippines. The narrator of this story had just started their very first job, working the graveyard shift at a call center. The office was located in a brand new high-rise building, but only half of the office space was actually completed. The other half was still actively under renovation. The layout of the office was like an elongated donut. In the center of the donut was the elevator lobby and the main entrance doors. One half of the circle was a fully operational, brightly lit production floor. It had desks, computers, manager offices, and a break room. It was a typical modern call center. But the other half of the circle was completely different. It was reserved for conference rooms, the nurse office, storage rooms, and the restrooms. Because this side was unfinished, the walls were bare concrete and wires were hanging from the ceiling. To save electricity, the building security guards kept the lights turned off on this side of the floor. As a result, employees avoided going over there unless they absolutely had to use the restroom. Even then, they would make a fast dash in and out of the dark hallway. 2 weeks after the office opened, the narrator was working their shift when their teammate began to suffer from a terrible migraine. She was visibly sick and struggling to focus on her calls. The narrator suggested that she speak to their team leader. The team leader agreed that she needed to rest and told her to go to the nurse office. The nurse office was located on the unfinished side of the floor. The only reason anyone knew it was there was because of a small sign above the door. The narrator decided to accompany their sick teammate so she would not have to walk through the dark, under construction hallway alone. They walked over to the dark side of the building and found the door with the nurse sign. Even though the hallway was dark, the light inside the office was on. The door had a vertical glass window pane. The narrator and their teammate peeked inside. They saw a fully furnished medical clinic. There was a clean sickbed with white sheets, a desk, medical equipment, and cabinets filled with supplies. It looked exactly like a professional clinic. However, the door was locked, and the nurse was nowhere to be seen. They figured the nurse must be on a break, so they decided to walk back to the bright side of the office and try again in 30 minutes. After half an hour, they walked back to the unfinished side of the floor. This time, they noticed that the light inside the nurse office was completely turned off. They were frustrated, thinking that the shift nurse might have gone home early. The narrator walked up to the door to see if there was a note or a schedule posted. For some reason, the narrator decided to reach out and turn the door handle. To their surprise, the door was unlocked and swung open. They stepped inside, but as they did, they realized something was terribly wrong. The fully equipped medical clinic they had seen just 30 minutes prior was completely gone. The room was entirely empty. There was no bed, no desk, no cabinets, and no medical equipment. The walls and floors were bare, unfinished concrete. The only light in the room came from a tiny nightlight plugged into an exposed electrical socket on the wall. It was as if the clinic they had looked at earlier had never existed at all. Just as they were standing there in shock, a security guard walked up to them. He asked them what they were doing wandering around in an unfinished room. The narrator and their teammate tried to explain that they had seen a fully furnished nurse office in this exact room just a short time ago. The guard looked at them like they were crazy. He told them that this room had been under construction for months and was completely empty. As they were trying to convince the guard, the air in the room suddenly went freezing cold. The temperature dropped so fast that they could see their own breath. The hair on the back of their necks stood up, and a feeling of intense dread washed over them. Nobody could speak. The silence was heavy and suffocating. Suddenly, the sick teammate burst into hysterical tears and began to hyperventilate. The security guard, now looking very nervous himself, quickly ushered them out of the room and locked the door behind them. They were escorted back to their desks, and the team leader had to send the teammate to the hospital because she could not calm down. The company never spoke about the incident again. It remained an unspoken mystery of the late night shift, a reminder that some spaces are better left unvisited when the sun goes down. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. When you are young and looking for a way to make some extra cash, working a delivery job seems like an easy choice. You get to drive around, listen to your favorite music, and if you are lucky, you get some pretty good tips. Brandon was a teenager who thought exactly this when he took a job at a local pizza parlor. It was a small family-owned shop in a quiet suburban town, the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. For months, Brandon worked the counter and made deliveries without any issues. But all of that changed on one chilly night when his shift was almost over. The clock was ticking closer to closing time, and Brandon was already thinking about going home. He was cleaning down the counters and getting the register ready to close up when the shop phone started to ring. He walked over to the counter and picked up the receiver, expecting a late customer wanting to get a quick order in before they shut down. But when he spoke, there was absolutely nothing on the other end. Just pure, heavy silence. Brandon asked if anyone was there, but no one answered, so he hung up and went back to cleaning. About a minute later, the phone rang again. Brandon sighed and picked it up a second time, thinking it was probably a prank caller. Again, there was silence. He was just about to slam the receiver down when a voice finally broke through the quiet. The voice belonged to an old woman who sounded weak and cold. She asked for a regular cheese pizza to be delivered. Brandon was annoyed, but his boss told him he had to go, pointing out it was a final tip. Brandon took the address and the call ended abruptly. He waited for the kitchen to finish the pie and then loaded it into his car. It was just before 10 o'clock when he started driving toward the quiet side of town. The address led him to a small, one-story house on a completely dark and empty street. He walked to the door and rang the bell, but the house was pitch black. No one answered. Brandon was about to leave when he noticed a figure standing at the front window. It was the old woman. She was staring at him with a completely blank expression. Brandon waved the pizza box and called out, but she did not react. He shouted louder, and suddenly a massive, unnatural smile stretched across her face. It was a chilling grin that made his blood run cold. Brandon immediately felt unsafe. He ran back to his car, tossed the pizza onto the passenger seat, and decided to text his boss about the creepy situation. As he started the engine, he looked out the passenger window. The old woman was standing right there, pressing her face against the glass, staring at him with that same horrific smile. Brandon slammed on the gas and sped away, completely terrified. Our next story takes us to a rural area upstate, where a high school student named Marcus was working his delivery shift. Marcus drove an old Camry which was perfect for the rough country roads. One evening, around 7 o'clock as the sun was setting, he was sent out on his final delivery. The GPS led him deep into the forest, along winding dirt roads. After 15 minutes of driving through the dense trees, he arrived at a secluded wooden cottage near a lake. The lawn was completely overgrown, with grass reaching up to his knees, and there were no other houses in sight. Marcus walked up to the front door and knocked loudly since there was no doorbell. Within seconds, he heard the distinct sound of footsteps walking across the wooden floor inside. The footsteps stopped right behind the door. Marcus felt an intense wave of unease, realizing someone was watching him through the peephole. He called out that he was the pizza guy. Instead of opening the door, a low, harsh voice told him to bring the pizza around to the backyard. Marcus hesitated, but he did not want to get in trouble with his boss for bringing an order back. He reluctantly walked through the tall grass to the rear of the cottage. He could feel his heart beating faster as he stepped into the shadows. In the backyard, there was a small wooden shed and a concrete patio with a table and 4 chairs. Sitting in one of the chairs, facing completely away from him, was the shape of a person. Marcus slowly walked closer, calling out to get their attention, but the figure remained perfectly still. He spoke louder, but there was still no movement. Suddenly, a voice from behind him whispered to come over to the side of the house. Marcus turned and saw a man poking his head out from around the corner of the building, staring at him with a crazed, wide smile. The man told Marcus to come over because he wanted to show him something. Terrified, Marcus spun around and ran in the opposite direction, sprinting back to his car while still clutching the pizza box. He started the engine and tore down the dirt road, immediately calling the police. When officers investigated the cottage later, they discovered the building had been completely abandoned for a long time. Marcus never found out who was sitting in that patio chair, and he quit his job just a few days later, unable to shake the feeling of how close he had come to a trap. Our final story comes from the Poconos, an area known for its dense forests and isolated mountain roads. A delivery driver named Ryan was working a late-night shift on a dark, foggy evening. He was driving down a familiar shortcut to town when a man suddenly leaped out from the bushes directly in front of his car. Ryan slammed on his brakes, but he felt a sickening thump as the front of his vehicle hit the person. Panicking and cursing to himself, Ryan jumped out of the car to see if the person was all right. A man wearing a dark hoodie was lying completely motionless near the front tire. Before Ryan could even process what to do, a desperate scream for help echoed from the thick woods to his left. Believing someone else was in serious danger, Ryan made the split-second decision to search the trees. But as soon as he stepped into the woods, the screaming stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. He called out to see if anyone could hear him, but the only response was the sound of dry leaves crushing nearby. Ryan turned toward the noise and spotted a dark figure hiding behind a tree, watching his every move. Realizing he had been lured into an ambush, Ryan bolted back to his car. When Ryan got back to his vehicle, the man he had hit with his car was completely gone. There was no sign of him anywhere on the road. Terrified and confused, Ryan got into his car and quickly drove away to finish his delivery. He finally arrived at the customer's house, his hands shaking as he rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered, paid for the pizza, and then stared intently at his car. She asked Ryan if his company now allowed delivery partners to ride along. Ryan was confused and asked what she meant. The woman pointed and said there was someone sitting in his back seat. A cold sweat broke out across Ryan's body. He looked back and saw a figure sitting silently in the dark of his vehicle. Ryan used the customer's phone to call the police, but before they arrived, the intruder slipped out of the car and vanished into the night. When the police searched the vehicle, they found a blood-stained knife on the floor where the man had been hiding. This horrifying experience still haunts Ryan to this day, leaving him with the chilling and painful realization of what might have happened if he had not made that final delivery on that dark night. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Police officers are on the front lines of society. Every single day, when they put on their uniforms and head out to work, they have absolutely no idea what they are going to face. Some days are completely routine and quiet, but other days, they receive a call that leads them directly into some of the most disturbing, bizarre, and terrifying situations imaginable. Sometimes the horror is hidden in plain sight, and other times it is buried deep underground. Take the small, peaceful town of Glen Rose, Texas. In this tight-knit community, neighbors look out for one another. That is why on a warm afternoon, the residents of a quiet street became deeply concerned when they noticed 24-year-old Tasha Chantel Hatcher acting incredibly strange. Tasha was a single mother of a beautiful 2-year-old girl named NVA. To anyone who saw them, Tasha seemed like a completely normal, playful, and caring mother. But on this specific day, Tasha was pacing around her front yard, looking extremely nervous. Suddenly, she went inside and blasted music from her house at a deafening volume. The neighbors waited, but the erratic behavior did not stop. Fearing for Tasha and her baby, they decided to call the local police to conduct a welfare check. When the officers arrived, Tasha answered. She was sweating and incoherent, clearly in a severe mental crisis. As they stepped inside, they immediately noticed a wave of intense heat and a strange smell coming from the kitchen. They followed the heat and found the oven turned on. When an officer opened the door, they gasped in horror. Inside the burning hot oven was little Envia. The police rushed to pull the crying toddler out. Tasha calmly admitted she had willfully placed her daughter inside. Envia was rushed to the hospital with severe second and third degree burns. She survived, but she was immediately placed in foster care. Tasha was arrested on the spot, charged with serious bodily injury to a child, and held on a $300,000 bond. Our next story takes us to a cold November night in Oklahoma in 1970. 3 teenagers named Jimmy Williams, Lee Johnson, and Michael Rios were incredibly excited. They had planned a fun night out, piling into Jimmy's brand new, metallic blue 1969 Camaro to drive to a high school football game. They waved goodbye to their parents, promising to be home by curfew, but they never arrived at the game. They vanished into thin air, leaving no clues, no tire tracks, and absolutely no answers. Just a year earlier, in 1969, another vehicle had vanished in the exact same area. 69-year-old John Alva Porter was driving his friends Nora Duncan and Kleber Hammock in his 1950 Chevrolet. Just like the teenagers, they disappeared without a single trace. For over 45 years, both cases remained completely cold, and the families eventually began to lose all hope. Then, fast forward to September of 2013. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol was conducting a routine training exercise at Foss Lake. The divers were practicing with new sonar equipment, scanning the deep, murky waters of the lake. Suddenly, the sonar picked up 2 large metallic shapes resting side by side at the very bottom of the lake. The divers swam down through the dark water to investigate. When they reached the bottom, they realized they were looking at 2 vintage cars, buried deep in the mud. The police brought in heavy towing equipment to pull the vehicles out. The first car they recovered was the 1969 Camaro. When they opened the rusted doors, they found the skeletal remains of 3 people. It was Jimmy, Lee, and Michael, still wearing the clothes they had on the night they vanished. Right next to the Camaro, they pulled up the 1950 Chevrolet, which also contained the remains of John, Nora, and Kleber. Now let us travel to Slingerlands, New York. during Halloween night of 2015. Slingerlands is an upscale, wealthy neighborhood where serious crime is unheard of. A local woman was looking out her window when she noticed two strange figures hanging from a large tree in her front yard. They looked like realistic, life-size decorations of dead bodies, but she knew she had not put up any decorations. Earlier, she had noticed two men walking suspiciously around her lawn, whispering, but they walked away when she turned on her porch light. Feeling a sudden dread, she called the police. When officers arrived, they shined their flashlights onto the figures. Upon closer inspection, their blood ran cold. These were not plastic decorations. They were real, heavily decomposed human bodies. Our next case involves a terrifying discovery made inside a home, which was later shared by a police officer online. It was a slow, quiet summer night when two officers received a call from an elderly woman. She had just returned from a week-long vacation with her daughter and noticed that the large, old-fashioned air vent cover in her living room was sagging down. It looked as if a heavy object was resting inside the ductwork, causing the metal to bulge. She assumed an animal had climbed in from the roof and died. When the officers entered the house, they were immediately hit by a foul, overwhelming odor of decay, though the elderly woman could not smell it. They followed the scent to the living room vent, which was secured with 4 large, heavy screws. The officers pulled out their tools and slowly began to remove the cover. But when they shined their flashlights inside the dark duct, they did not see an animal. They saw a pair of brown work boots. With great difficulty, they managed to pull the body out of the narrow metal shaft. It was a bald man in his mid-40s, wearing an unzipped black hoodie and denim jeans. In his cold, stiff fingers, he was tightly gripping a large knife. The police reconstructed the scene and realized the man had climbed onto the roof, entered the intake vent, and tried to slide down into the house to attack the elderly woman. But the duct was too narrow, and he became completely wedged. Trapped in the summer heat with no way to escape or call for help, he slowly died of dehydration, holding his weapon in the dark. Finally, we look at a highly disturbing case from Sweden in September of 2015. A 38-year-old doctor who was highly respected and described by friends as polite and helpful was actually harboring a dark secret. He had spent years building a soundproof underground concrete bunker on his isolated property, complete with a bathroom and a bed, designed to keep victims captive. On September 12th, the doctor met with a woman he knew and offered her a batch of fresh strawberries. But he had laced the strawberries with a powerful sedative. Once she fell unconscious, he loaded her into a wheelchair, put her in his car, and drove her hundreds of miles to his bunker, where he kept her locked up and repeatedly abused her. A few days later, the doctor drove her back to her apartment to collect her things. But when they arrived, he saw that the police had already searched the place. In a panic, he decided to take her directly to the police station, planning to force her to tell officers she was fine. But the officers noticed her terror and pulled her aside. Once she was safe, she told them everything. The police arrested the doctor and searched his property, uncovering rubber masks, syringes, and heavy chains bolted to the bunker walls. He was sentenced to a long prison term, exposing the monster behind the polite facade. And finally, we have a story that starts out as an absolute nightmare, but ends with a bizarre twist. A snorkeler was exploring the clear waters of a local lake when he saw 2 human figures sitting upright at the bottom. He panicked, swam to the surface, and called emergency services. The police dispatched a dive team to investigate. One of the divers went down with an underwater camera, preparing for a gruesome scene. But as the diver swam closer, he realized something was off. The 2 figures were sitting in plastic lawn chairs, positioned as if they were having a tea party. One of them was holding a sign that read, "Bernie living the dream in the river." Upon closer inspection, the diver realized they were just plastic skeletons, fully dressed, placed there as a hilarious prank by local scuba divers. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. We have all seen someone standing on the shoulder of a dark, empty highway with their thumb pointing up toward the sky. For decades, picking up a traveler was just a normal part of life. It was a simple act of human kindness. But over the years, that simple act turned into a dangerous gamble. You never truly know who you are letting into your vehicle. You do not know what they are carrying in their pockets, or what thoughts are running through their mind. This is a lesson that a woman named Nikki learned in the early 1980s, and it is a story that she passed down to her family and friends for many years as a warning. Nikki was a young woman in her mid-20s, living in a quiet town about a 2-hour drive away from the nearest major city. She was the kind of person who always looked for the best in people. If someone was hurting or needed a hand, Nikki was always the first to step forward. And so, on a clear afternoon, as she was driving down the highway toward the city, she noticed a man walking alone on the dirt shoulder. As her car got closer, the man stopped, turned around, and stuck out his thumb. It was the universal sign of a hitchhiker. Nikki felt a sudden wave of sympathy. She did not want to leave this man stranded in the middle of nowhere, so she quickly pulled her car over to the side of the road and rolled down her window. She asked the man if he needed a lift. The man smiled politely. He seemed a little bit shy, which actually made Nikki feel much safer about the whole situation. He told her that he was trying to get into the city. Nikki gave him a warm smile, reached over, and popped open the passenger door. The man thanked her, tossed his small bag into the back seat, and buckled himself in. As they started driving, Nikki felt completely at ease. They began chatting about ordinary things. They talked about their friends, the local news, and the weather. It was just happy small talk, and the 2 hours seemed like they were going to fly by. Nikki felt like she was getting along absolutely great with her new passenger. About halfway through the journey, Nikki decided to stop at a roadside diner for dinner. She could tell the man was looking pretty hungry, and during their conversation, he had mentioned that he was incredibly strapped for cash. In fact, he told her that was the entire reason he was hitchhiking in the first place. He simply could not afford any other way to travel. When the bill came, Nikki insisted on paying for his food. The man seemed very flustered and awkward about her generosity, but she just smiled and told him not to worry about it. Eventually, he relented and they got back in the car and went on their way. As soon as they arrived in the downtown area, the man thanked her and asked to be dropped off. But before he stepped out of the vehicle, he hesitated. He turned to Nikki and asked if he could have her phone number. He said he would love to keep in touch and catch up again one day. Nikki was absolutely thrilled. She felt proud of herself for helping a new friend, so she wrote down her number and handed it to him. She watched him walk away into the city crowd, feeling a warm sense of having done a good deed. But the problem was, appearances can be incredibly deceiving. Fast forward to exactly 1 week later. Nikki was at home when her phone started ringing. She quickly picked it up and said hello. On the other end of the line was the familiar voice of the hitchhiker, but his tone was completely different now. He did not sound shy or polite anymore. Before Nikki could even say another word, the man interrupted her. He told her that she needed to listen to him very carefully. He told her that she should thank God that she was raised to be such a nice person. The man explained that when he first stepped into her car, he was not looking for a friendly ride. He told Nikki that he had fully planned on raping her and murdering her. His plan was to wait until they reached that quiet roadside diner. He was going to lure her away, take her life, steal her car, and dump her body in a deep ditch somewhere far down the road. But as they drove, Nikki had treated him with nothing but pure kindness. She had listened to his struggles, and she had even bought him dinner with a genuine smile on her face. Because of her kindness, he simply could not bring himself to do it. He told her that he realized he could never live with himself if he harmed such a gentle soul. Then, the man gave her one final piece of advice. He pleaded with her never ever to pick up another hitchhiker again. And then he hung up. Nikki sat there in complete shock, holding the silent receiver tightly against her ear as her mind raced. She immediately tried to redial the number, but it turned out to be a public payphone on a busy street corner. She never heard from that man ever again. It is truly terrifying to think how close she came to losing her life that day, and how a simple act of genuine human kindness was the absolute only thing that saved her from a terrible fate in a dark, empty ditch. That warning is something that many drivers have had to learn the hard way. Fast forward to a cold Saturday night around 1 o'clock in the morning. A young man named Nathan was driving down Route 542 in New Jersey. If you have ever been on that road, You know it is a long, isolating stretch of highway with thick woods pressing in on both sides. There are barely any houses, and at that hour of the night there was absolutely nobody else on the road. Nathan was on his way back home after spending some time in town with his friends. Because the highway was pitch black, he turned on the high-powered off-road lights on his Jeep Wrangler just to get a better view of the path ahead. As he drove through the darkness, the bright lights illuminated a figure standing on the shoulder far in the distance. As the Jeep got closer, the figure raised his arm and stuck his thumb in the air. Nathan felt his heart begin to race. He knew that stopping for a stranger in the middle of the night was a terrible idea, but his instincts competed with his desire to help. He slowed down his vehicle just to get a good look at the person. It appeared to be a young man, probably around 28 years old, wearing a light gray hoodie with the hood pulled up high over his head, and blue denim jeans. In a sudden split-second decision, Nathan ignored his better judgment. He brought the Jeep to a complete stop, rolled down the window, and asked the stranger where he was heading. The man looked at him and said in a deep, quiet tone that he was just heading up the road. Nathan told him to hop in. The man walked over slowly and opened the passenger door. Now, Jeep Wranglers are known for having very tight seals on the doors, meaning you have to close them with some force. When the man tried to pull the door shut, it did not latch properly. Nathan politely looked over and told him that the door did not shut all the way, and that he just needed to open it and slam it shut really hard. But the stranger's response to this simple request was deeply unsettling. The man did not move. He just sat there frozen for about 3 seconds. Then he slowly turned his head to look directly at Nathan. He paused again, then slowly turned his head to the right. He waited another 3 or 4 seconds in complete silence before finally opening the door and slamming it shut. The slow, robotic way the man moved made Nathan instantly regret his decision to let him into the car. But it was too late to back out now. Nathan put his foot on the gas and the Jeep began to speed down the road. The speed limit on Route 542 was 55 miles per hour, but Nathan pushed his vehicle up to 75 miles per hour. He just wanted to get this man to his destination as fast as humanly possible and get him out of his sight. Nathan tried to break the heavy silence in the vehicle. He asked the man how far up the road he needed to go. There was an incredibly awkward gap of silence before the passenger finally replied, with just a few miles up the road. Nathan wanted to reach over and turn on the radio just to drown out the suffocating silence, but a voice in the back of his mind told him to keep his hands on the wheel and stay completely focused. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Nathan noticed that the passenger had turned his head and was staring directly at him. For a full mile, Nathan could feel the man's heavy gaze burning into the side of his face. He kept his eyes locked on the road, doing everything in his power not to look back. And then the passenger finally broke his silence. In a calm voice, he asked Nathan if he had ever wondered for the longest time if it was just worth it to end it all. Nathan felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He looked over in utter confusion and terror. At that moment, the man reached his hand deep into his pocket. He told Nathan that he had been carrying a knife with him for the past few weeks, just wondering when the right time would come to use it. And then he pulled a large red folding knife out of his pocket. Nathan felt his stomach completely drop. He was trapped in a moving vehicle on a pitch-black highway with an armed, unstable stranger. He managed to keep his voice steady and calm enough to tell the man to put the knife away immediately, but the passenger did not seem bothered at all by the request. In a flat, emotionless voice, he pointed ahead and told Nathan to pull over next to the speed limit sign on the shoulder. Fearing what might happen if he refused, Nathan complied. He slowed the Jeep down and brought it to a stop right next to the metal sign. What followed next still haunts Nathan to this very day. The man did not try to attack Nathan right away. Instead, he raised the blade and began to violently slit his own forearm. Nathan watched in complete horror as the metal blade cut deep into the skin, right alongside 3 older scars from previous self-inflicted wounds. The man let out a low, disturbing groan as the blood started to drip. Nathan was completely terrified. He managed to choke out the words, telling the man that he needed to get out of his car right now. The man stopped what he was doing, turned his bloodied arm toward Nathan, and looked at him with completely empty, hollow eyes. He told Nathan to get out of the car because there was something he wanted to show him. Nathan immediately refused the offer, but the man raised the sharp knife closer to Nathan's face in a clear, silent threat. He repeated himself, telling Nathan to just get out for a second, and that there was something he wanted to show him behind that sign. At this point, Nathan knew his life was on the line. He had to act fast and be incredibly smart to survive. He forced himself to look calm. He looked at the man and said, "Yeah, okay, let's go." Nathan opened his driver's side door, making sure to leave it wide open. He stepped out onto the dark highway, raised his hands in the air, and slowly backed away from the vehicle. The passenger also opened his door and stepped out. The man started walking slowly around the front of the Jeep, heading over to Nathan's side. But the passenger made one critical mistake. As he walked around the vehicle, there was a brief moment where he was directly behind the hood, blocked from Nathan's line of sight. At that exact second, Nathan sprinted back to the open driver's seat. He jumped inside, pulled the door shut, slammed the gear shifter into drive, and floored the accelerator. The tires squealed as the Jeep launched forward down the road, leaving the armed stranger standing completely alone in the pitch-black woods. Nathan drove straight home, his chest heaving, as he tried not to throw up from the sheer adrenaline. He had survived a nightmare, and he knew he would never stop for a stranger on a dark road ever again. But sometimes the danger comes when you are the one who is stranded on the road, desperate for a ride home. Back in 2005, a 16-year-old teenager went to a massive party deep in the countryside of Virginia with his friends, Alex and Brianna. Because they planned to drink, Brianna was supposed to be their designated driver. But fast forward a few hours, and Brianna had to leave suddenly for a family emergency. Alex promised they would easily find another ride, but as the night went on, he vanished into the crowd too. Stranded and heavily intoxicated at 2 in the morning, the teenager decided to walk home along the dark, empty highway. After walking for about 15 long minutes in the cold air, a faded blue Ford Explorer pulled up next to him on the highway. The driver looked out and offered him a warm lift home. Overjoyed, the exhausted teenager climbed into the passenger seat and immediately passed out from all the alcohol. When he woke up a while later, he realized they were on a completely unfamiliar road, heading deep into the dark woods. He nervously asked where they were going and begged to be let out, but the driver turned to look at him with a cold expression and said a firm, terrifying no. Panicking and feeling incredibly sick from the alcohol, the teenager pretended to gag. As the driver slowed down in disgust, the teenager actually threw up directly onto the driver's lap. The screaming man slammed on the brakes in absolute shock, and the teenager pushed the door open, bolted into the dark woods, and hid under some thick bushes. The driver searched for him with a bright flashlight, walking right past his hiding spot. Once the driver went deeper into the forest, the teenager ran back to the road, flagged down a passing car, and made it home safely to his family. He never got the license plate, and the kidnapper was never caught by the police. But he never forgot how a desperate ride with a stranger almost cost him his life, leaving a permanent scar on his memory. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. This happened many years ago, and to be completely honest with you, I have never liked camping. I am just not built for the outdoors. The dirt, the bugs, the constant humidity, and those incredibly uncomfortable nights spent inside a thin sleeping bag that somehow always ends up feeling like you are sleeping on a pile of sharp rocks by the morning. It is just not my thing. But unfortunately for me, I have been camping more times than I can actually count, though it was never once by my own choice. You see, my dad is one of those incredibly rugged, wilderness-loving types of guys. He is the kind of person who believes that the only way to truly find yourself is to get lost in the middle of nowhere. Every single summer when I was growing up, he would drag me out into the deep woods with a group of his equally rugged, outdoorsy friends. Their main goal was always to disconnect entirely from technology and reconnect with nature. But for me, it was just a countdown of days until I could finally go back home to electricity and a real bed. By the time I finally hit my sophomore year of high school, I had decided that I had suffered in silence for long enough. I knew another summer trip was coming up, so I put my foot down. I finally managed to convince my dad to let me bring a friend along on the trip. thinking that having someone my own age there would at least make the entire ordeal a little more bearable. To my absolute surprise, my dad actually agreed without putting up much of a fight. So, I immediately asked my friend Charles from school if he wanted to come along. Now, you might think that bringing Charles would have actually made the whole experience worse for me, considering he was a hardcore Boy Scout back in the day and genuinely loved being out in the wild. But Charles was a really cool guy about it. Sure, he teased me relentlessly for my deep hatred of the outdoors, but he was not one of those judgmental types who made you feel like you were not a real man just because you did not want to sleep on the dirt. Plus, I figured that if I absolutely had to suffer out there, I might as well suffer with someone who actually knew how to start a fire from scratch and pitch a tent without turning the entire process into a full-blown disaster. Charles was incredibly stoked to join us. Part of it was definitely because of his genuine love for camping, but another big part of it was that back then, Charles was always looking for literally any excuse he could find to get away from his parents and his tense home life. Unfortunately, the trip did not go exactly as we had planned right from the start. It turned out that one of my dad's close friends had completely messed up the campsite booking system. Instead of driving out to some remote, incredibly peaceful spot deep in the silent woods like we always did, we ended up pulling into this highly developed, overcrowded, and honestly pretty crappy campsite. I am not talking about a clearing in the trees. I am talking about indoor public bathrooms, fully paved concrete walkways, and even a colorful plastic playground designed for little kids. It was not real camping by any stretch of the imagination. It was basically just glorified backyard living, or what people nowadays like to call glamping. To say that my dad was upset when we pulled up would be a massive understatement. He looked like he wanted to drive the car straight into a tree. But we did not even discover the absolute worst part of the situation until a few hours later. Right next to the boundary line of our designated campsite was a mini amusement park. I am completely serious. It was an actual, functioning amusement park, complete with carnival game booths, a giant rotating Ferris wheel, and a handful of metal roller coasters looming high over the tree line. It was a completely surreal sight. Those two completely different settings were never, ever supposed to collide like that. An amusement park and a quiet campsite just do not belong together. Everyone in our group was incredibly pissed off. My dad and his friends spent the entire afternoon grumbling to each other about how this was not real camping, and Charles would not shut up about it either. He kept repeating the phrase, "This is not real camping," over and over again, as if I needed a constant reminder of how bad the situation was. It quickly started getting on my nerves because Charles kept making these little sarcastic jokes about my family, acting as if we were the ones who did not know what real camping actually looked like. Now, as much as I absolutely detest camping, I still know what a proper outdoor trip is supposed to look like. So, I was getting more and more annoyed that Charles was constantly suggesting we were clueless. I finally pulled him aside and told him to just knock it off, and thankfully, he realized he was pushing it and stopped. The entire situation just flat out sucked. We had driven for several long hours to get to this specific site, so it was not like we could just pack up the cars and drive all the way back home. With no better options on the table, we decided to just make the best of a bad situation. The grown-ups sulked around the picnic table for a while, but eventually they got to work setting up the camp. And Charles, of course, saw this as his golden opportunity to shine. Within just a few minutes, he had our shared tent up. All the knots were tied perfectly, the rainfly was incredibly secure, and the entire structure was staked and taut, like it had just come straight out of an official military manual. Even my dad, who was the kind of rugged man who never really gave compliments unless someone was actively bleeding or completely unconscious, stood there and nodded his head in quiet approval. That actually got under my skin a bit because I wanted my dad to look at me that way, not my friend. Charles and I were sharing that tent, and once everything was fully set up and we had finished eating a pretty mediocre dinner, we decided to slip away for a bit, under the excuse of going to organize our sleeping gear inside the tent. The actual truth was that Charles had secretly brought along a little metal pipe and some weed stashed away inside an old dented metal Altoids tin. It was nothing crazy, just a tiny amount to help take the edge off the boring night. I should probably mention that, Back then, Charles and I were in that typical teenage delinquent phase of life where we actively liked causing minor trouble and hanging around in places where we clearly did not belong. I do not smoke weed anymore, and a part of me will always wonder if the only reason I ever did it back then was because I was desperately trying to act out and defy the rules. Anyway, the two of us quietly snuck past the campfire, walked a little ways into the dark woods, and smoked. We were chuckling to ourselves the entire time like idiots. I do not think either of us were even remotely worried about smelling like smoke because we fully planned on avoiding the adults for the remainder of the night anyway. We finished our session and made our way back to the relative safety of our tent. After spending a few hours just chilling out, listening to the distant sounds of the amusement park, and talking about our other friends from school, we both realized that we had way too much nervous energy to actually go to sleep. Charles suddenly got this incredibly mischievous, wide grin on his face, and I knew immediately that he was cooking up some kind of terrible idea. He looked at me and suggested that we go explore the area. I was initially very skeptical and told him it was a bad idea, but then I realized he did not mean the boring campground. He was pointing directly at the dark, silent amusement park next door that instantly piqued my interest. Charles said it would probably be a total piece of cake to sneak inside and climb all the way to the top of one of those steel roller coasters. Climbing tall structures was something the two of us absolutely loved doing back in our hometown, and the thrilling thought of climbing a real roller coaster in the dead of night was just too exciting to pass up. So we waited until we were absolutely sure that my dad and his friends were completely asleep. Once the coast was clear, we made our move. It was incredibly late by then, well after midnight. We grabbed our flashlights, slipped out of the tent zipper as quietly as possible, and headed straight toward the tall chain-link fence that surrounded the amusement park. The fence itself was actually not even that hard to climb. With just a quick physical boost from Charles, I cleared the top, and a second later, he was right over the top beside me. We were officially inside. The entire amusement park was completely dark, but there were still security guards actively patrolling the grounds. Every so often, we would hear the low, electric hum of a plastic golf cart making its slow rounds through the paved pathways. It felt exactly like we were playing some kind of high-stakes stealth video game, constantly sneaking around from shadow to shadow and trying our absolute best not to get spotted. We progressed through the silent park slowly, ducking behind closed carnival game booths and keeping a very close eye on the patrol routes. At one point, we had to make a full-blown sprint across a wide-open stretch of asphalt road to avoid a guard who was turning a corner. It was actually incredibly thrilling, but at the exact same time, it was scary as hell. It is a really hard feeling to properly describe to someone who has never done it. Everything felt like a harmless game to us, but both of us knew, deep down, that the real-world consequences would be incredibly harsh if we got caught by the police. We finally made it to the very base of the tallest roller coaster, and from up close, the steel structure looked way bigger and more intimidating than it ever had from our campsite. We spotted the narrow metal maintenance stairs running directly up alongside the main steep ascent, and we did not hesitate for a single second. The cold metal rungs clanged very softly under our sneakers as we climbed up one slow step at a time, trying our absolute best not to make any loud noises that would echo through the empty park. There were absolutely no safety railings for a significant part of that steep climb, which was actually kind of terrifying as the wind began to pick up. We finally reached the very top of the track, and the view from up there was absolutely unreal. We could see the entire dark park laid out directly below us like a miniature toy model. We took a single photo together up there on my phone just to prove we did it. I really wish we had taken more pictures that night, but we were being extremely cautious not to draw any unwanted attention to ourselves. We knew that if a security guard spotted us from below, there would be absolutely no way for us to get down and escape in time. Eventually, we figured that we had pushed our luck far enough and decided it was time to head back down to Earth. After making it safely back to the bottom of the structure, we started creeping through the silent park, heading back the exact same way we had come. For whatever reason, our return route felt much quicker than the initial walk. Maybe the security patrol was not quite as intense at that specific hour of the night. but I really could not tell you for sure. We were maybe 5 minutes away from the exact spot where we had scaled the fence when we suddenly had to stop dead in our tracks. One of the security guards was making a slow round in a golf cart right ahead of us, so we had to quickly duck behind a wooden snack shack and wait in the dark for them to pass. That is the exact moment when I noticed something move in the deep shadows nearby. At first, I honestly thought that my eyes were just playing tricks on me, or that maybe it was just a strange shadow cast by the golf cart's bouncing headlights. But then, Charles suddenly tapped my arm hard and pointed his finger in the exact same direction. I focused my gaze a bit more into the darkness and confirmed it. About 30 feet away from us, just barely visible in the dark space between two storage buildings, was another person. They were crouching down low just like we were, looking like they were also actively sneaking around and trying their best to avoid the security guards. But this did not look like a kid. The absolute worst part about the situation was that I was fairly confident this person was staring directly at us. At this point, we were actually getting kind of terrified. Between the patrolling guards and now this random person in the dark, the entire situation was getting incredibly overwhelming. As much as we wanted to run away, we still could not move because the security golf cart still had not fully passed our position. I kept my eyes completely glued to the crouching figure, and suddenly, they actually started to move. The person darted quickly across a patch of open ground, passing directly through the dim spill of yellow light coming from a nearby street lamp. For a split second, I saw him clearly. It was a grown man, just as I had suspected. He was wearing tattered, dirty clothing, and he had this really awkward, limping stride as if he was badly injured or physically disfigured. But none of that was nearly as unsettling as the dark, thick liquid smeared heavily across his face. It looked exactly like wet blood. Charles saw it too, and the two of us immediately exchanged a completely terrified look. Eventually, the strange man ducked back out of sight into the shadows. The security guard finally drove past us, and we did not wait another second. We kept moving as fast as we could. We did not say a single word to each other as we made our way back to the fence. I kept checking over my shoulder every few seconds, absolutely convinced that the bloody man was following us, but the path behind us remained empty. We reached the fence, scaled it the exact same way we had entered, and dropped down onto the dirt on the other side. But the major difference this time was that we did not laugh about it. All I wanted was to be back in the safe, familiar confines of our tent. I could tell Charles was thinking the exact same thing. By the time we made it back inside our sleeping bags, neither of us even brought up the idea of sleeping. We just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the tent, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. The best explanation we could come up with was that it was just a homeless guy doing God knows what in the park. It was a stupid, lazy explanation, I know, but our teenage brains simply could not think of anything else at the time. The next morning started off completely normally. We got up, had a quick bite to eat, and started packing our fishing gear to head down to the water. But around 10 in the morning, one of the main campsite staffers came around to our tent site. They were giving an emergency announcement that the entire campground was supposed to hear. Apparently, a local man had been stabbed and killed the night before at a public lake about 4 miles away from our campground. The staff were not giving many details, but they told us that the guy who did it was still on the loose, and the local sheriff's office had asked all park rangers and campsite staff within a certain mile radius to be on high alert. They described the suspect as a highly disheveled white male in his late 30s, shirtless or wearing tattered clothes, and possibly bleeding or with blood visible on his body. Then, they instructed all of us to pack up our things and leave the site immediately for our own safety. Charles and I instantly connected the dots. It must have been the exact same guy we had seen crouching in the shadows the night before, but we kept our mouths completely shut. We did not tell my dad. We did not tell the park rangers. We did not tell anyone, and to this day I still do not fully know why we chose to stay silent. I know I am going to get a bunch of hate for this, and I completely understand why. But at that specific age, I was way more concerned with staying out of trouble for trespassing and smoking than I was with anything else. I still kick myself constantly for not speaking up back then. My statement to the police could have easily led to the quick capture of an incredibly dangerous murderer, who may have gone on to commit even more crimes. I am still very close with Charles today. We went to the same college, graduated together, and we even work in similar professional fields. This terrifying experience is something we almost never talk about, though. If I am being completely honest, I think Charles feels a lot more guilt about our silence than I do. Mistakes and regret aside, though, I think it is absolutely crazy that my friend and I were standing mere feet away from a literal murderer on the run. I really do not like thinking about what could have happened to us had our paths crossed in a different way that night. For our second story, we are going to travel to the bustling streets of New York City back in October of 2016. Now, if you remember that time, that was right when that incredibly weird and widespread clown hysteria was all over the news. People all across the country were constantly posting videos of creepy clown sightings. Most of them were obviously harmless hoaxes, or just teenagers trying to get attention on social media. But as you probably know, there were a couple of true cases mixed in that were downright terrifying. What happened to me was easily one of them. At the time, I was 16 years old and a junior in high school. On this particular afternoon, I had just finished my 7th period class, and after saying a quick goodbye to all of my friends, I hopped onto the 6 train heading uptown. The train carriage was unusually empty, which was a little unusual for that hour, but certainly not unheard of. Because of that, I was not being very attentive to my surroundings at all. I had my headphones pushed in tight and I was blasting music, probably some Drake song. To make matters even worse, I was actively reviewing chemistry flashcards on my phone screen, so my mind was about as unaware of my environment as humanly possible. That is never a good idea when you are traveling alone in New York, but I knew the route so well that I figured I would be completely fine. My plan was to get off the train at 96th Street and walk the remaining blocks home from there. It was just a completely regular, boring Wednesday, but things went downhill incredibly fast. The train finally arrived at 96th Street, and I jumped out of my seat instinctively, barely even looking up from my screen to confirm it was the correct station. That daily train ride was something I had done so many times in my life that the entire routine had become absolute second nature to me. Getting on and off the train was basically just a physical reflex. With my head still buried deep in my phone and my music still blasting loudly in my ears, I made my way over toward the metal doors. But as soon as they began to slide open, I suddenly realized out of the very edge of my peripheral vision that something large was obstructing my path. I stopped and looked up. I expected to see a regular commuter waiting to get on. Instead, some guy had stepped directly into the middle of the doorway. Only, it was not a normal person at all. It was a clown. The man was wearing the full exaggerated outfit. He had on oversized rainbow-colored pants, a baggy yellow shirt held up by bright red suspenders, giant red clown shoes, and this incredibly disturbing white makeup smeared thickly across his face. He had a red nose, painted blue eyebrows, the whole cartoon nightmare look. The only thing that was missing was the typical colorful wig, leaving his natural head exposed. I was literally frozen in absolute shock at the sheer sight of him standing there. Not only was I caught completely off guard, but until that exact moment, I had never been in such close proximity to something so bizarre and unsettling. He did not say a single word to me. He just stood there dead center, not making any effort to actually get onto the train, but very clearly preventing me from stepping off onto the platform. I finally snapped out of my frozen haze and realized that I had maybe 5 seconds before the train doors would slide shut again. So I had to make a decision immediately. I took a deep breath and tried to quickly brush past him. But the literal moment I made physical contact with his shoulder, the clown suddenly leaned down in one incredibly fluid, aggressive motion, as if he was trying to force us to be face to face. Before he could grab hold of me or restrain me in any way, I panicked and sprinted right past him, and that is when he suddenly lurched forward in a violent attempt to tackle me to the ground. I managed to dodge his reach and just kept running as fast as I could down the platform. He immediately started chasing after me. It was absolutely terrifying. There was not another soul in sight, and I was being actively pursued by what looked like a killer clown. The 96th Street station is typically relatively quiet in the early afternoon hours, so I was essentially completely on my own down there. I shot a quick, panicked glance over my shoulder and saw him pursuing me. but his running stride was not normal at all. He was running with this incredibly jerky, awkward motion, as if his limbs were completely disproportionate to his body. But I was much more focused on what he was now holding tightly in his right hand. It was a large, silver kitchen knife. I had absolutely no idea where he had been hiding it, or what his actual intentions were, but I did not care to find out. I ran up the concrete stairs as fast as my legs could possibly carry me, burst out of the station doors, and immediately reported the situation to the police. The clown did not follow me out onto the street. The police immediately sent officers down into the station, but by the time they arrived, he was completely gone. Even after speaking with the officers and being reassured that I was safe, I could not get the completely irrational thought out of my head that he had somehow followed me, knew where I lived, and was going to track me down later. But that obviously never happened. In fact, nothing else ever happened at all. I would not be surprised if my encounter ended up on the local news as just another one of the many strange clown sightings of 2016. Although I cannot say for sure, it took me several weeks to fully get over the terror of that afternoon. Now, our third and final story is perhaps the most bizarre and dangerous of them all, and it is a prime example of how easy it is to slide into something incredibly illegal without even realizing it. This is not your typical scary story, but I promise you it is absolutely worth a listen. I was about 2 years out of my undergraduate college degree when the whole thing started. While I was technically enrolled and getting an online graduate certificate at the exact same school where I had obtained my bachelor's, I still had a massive amount of free time on my hands. During that specific period of my life, I was constantly jumping around from one odd job to another, looking for any random gig to fill up my hours and help me stack some quick cash. Let us just say that Indeed was my absolute best friend at the time. I honestly found about 90% of my job leads from that one website alone. I was getting incredibly tired of door dashing around the same 6 neighborhoods for minimum wage, putting miles on my car. So I decided that a complete change of pace was in order. As I was browsing through Indeed late one night, I suddenly stumbled upon something highly intriguing. It was a private lifeguarding job at a hotel located just a few towns over from me. Now I know that does not sound very abnormal by itself, but there were a couple of highly strange details in that specific listing that gave me serious pause. First of all, the scheduled hours were completely backward. They were not normal pool hours at all. You would typically expect a standard hotel pool to open up sometime in the morning and close down sometime in the evening, with maybe a few hours of downtime in the middle of the day, right? Well, this job was the exact opposite. They wanted someone to operate and supervise the swimming pool from 5 in the evening until 1 in the morning during the week. It was basically a night shift for a swimming pool, which is highly unusual. But that was not even the strangest thing about the post. The job requirements explicitly requested an individual who did not speak a single word of Spanish. Let me repeat that for you because it is important. They specifically and explicitly wanted a lifeguard who did not speak Spanish. Here was the major problem. I have been speaking fluent Spanish since I was a little kid. I am literally half Mexican. On top of that, the specific town where the hotel was located was predominantly populated by Spanish-speaking Americans. So, that language requirement did not make any logical sense to me at all. In fact, absolutely nothing about the listing made sense. I remember being beyond perplexed as I combed through the details. But there was one very important thing that I was feeling pretty good about. The pay rate was $30 an hour, which was an absolute fortune for an easy lifeguarding job. Safe to say, I decided to completely disregard all of the other weird nonsense in the listing and focus my full attention on the incredible compensation. I figured I would just pretend that I did not know a single word of Spanish. What were they going to do? Test me? The gig must have been either brand new or in incredibly low demand, because I heard back from them almost immediately and was actually invited to come in for an interview within just a few hours. Fast forward to my very first day on the job. I pulled my car up to the hotel, and from the outside, everything looked exactly how you would expect a normal hotel to look. This friendly, pudgy Mexican-looking dude came out to greet me, and the two of us exchanged information and had a good laugh. He introduced himself as Esteban. He was actually really friendly and pretty funny, and his warm demeanor put my mind at ease a little bit. But as the two of us were walking into the main hotel complex, this other, much taller guy suddenly turned the corner and started staring me down with a very intense look. I could tell right away that I was being profiled, and I immediately started wondering whether having Esteban greet me so warmly was just a clever ploy to get me to lower my guard. The taller guy walked right up to me and immediately started communicating with me in rapid Spanish. He did not smile, he did not say hello, and he did not shake my hand. I instantly knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to test me to see whether or not I actually knew Spanish. The language requirement in the listing had definitely not been a joke. I gave him a completely blank, clueless stare, even though I understood every single word he was saying to me. He was not saying anything crazy, by the way. He was just rambling about the hot weather. After a few tense seconds of my blank stare, he suddenly turned to Esteban, and the two of them burst out laughing, like they had both been in on some funny practical joke. The taller guy flashed a warm smile, stretched out his hand, and told me he was just messing with me. I went along with it and laughed, but deep down, I was a little weirded out by the whole interaction. The tall guy introduced himself as Jefe, and he confirmed that Esteban was his main assistant. The three of us walked through the complex to get to the pool area, and Jefe, who I assumed was the main boss in charge, started talking me through the daily requirements of the job. According to him, they needed a lifeguard to work those late night hours, because the hotel wanted to increase its overall revenue, and they were planning to start charging non-guests a fee just to use the pool. I did not even know if that was legally allowed under their business permit. But I certainly was not about to start complaining about it. Jefe then explained that they specifically wanted a lifeguard who did not speak Spanish because it would prevent rowdy, Spanish-speaking outsiders from trying to harass or argue with me, which still did not make a ton of sense. But I just went along with it anyway. My actual responsibilities were quite simple. I was to act as the lifeguard, collect entry cash from the non-guests trying to enter the pool area, and call Jefe immediately if there was ever any sort of problem. And then, Jefe added one more highly specific rule. He told me that if anyone ever showed me a blue plastic wristband, I was to let them directly into what he called the pool house. The pool house was a huge, solid concrete building located directly behind my raised lifeguard stand. I did not ask any questions about it and just nodded my head. The first few weeks on the job were actually incredibly chill. A lot more people used the pool than I was initially expecting, so I definitely had my work cut out for me in terms of watching the water. I collected the entry money from the outsiders and kept a close eye on everything. For the first month, absolutely no one showed me a blue wristband. The very first time someone actually did show me a wristband was about a month into the job. On some random weekday, this very buff Hispanic guy wearing dark sunglasses and a nice white button-down shirt walked right up to my stand. He clearly did not know a single word of English. He quietly showed me a blue plastic wristband, and I got down, unlocked the heavy door to the pool house, and let him inside. About an hour later, he emerged from the building and began walking quickly toward the exit gate. The pool house door locked automatically behind him, so I did not have to interact with him again, but I watched him leave. I noticed that his black backpack looked significantly more full and heavy than it had when he first arrived. But other than that, everything seemed completely normal. Over the next few weeks, however, more and more people started showing me those blue wristbands, and a lot of them started showing up together in large groups. More and more non-guests started using the pool too, and I began collecting a lot more entry money than I ever had before. At one point, I realized that I was actually collecting way too much money. People entering the pool would consistently overpay me by a crazy amount of cash, and when I tried to give them their change, they would just wave their hands and tell me to keep it. I eventually called Jefe on the phone to tell him about these massive overpayments, but he quickly told me not to worry about it, saying that people simply made mistakes with cash all the time. I could easily tell that he did not want to talk about the money situation any more than he absolutely had to, because he abruptly hung up the phone while I was right in the middle of a sentence. Amidst everything fishy that had been going on at that pool, that short, harmless phone call finally confirmed to me that I was actively involved in something much bigger than just lifeguarding a hotel swimming pool. Only after hanging up that phone did the true terrifying gravity of the situation finally hit me. My mind started trying to smother all of the noise until there was only a single, solid thought that I could not purge from my brain. Money laundering. I did not know what to do. On one hand, my survival intuition was screaming at me that I was involved in something highly illegal and should pack my things and get out of there immediately. But on the other hand, I had no safe way of actually confirming my suspicions, and I really did not want to forfeit $30 an hour over a hunch. So I decided to keep my mouth shut and keep the job. But after that realization, I started actively piecing everything together. The concrete pool house, the building I had been told was just for pool filters, was very clearly where the shady operations were taking place. It was likely a hub for illegal gambling, drug trafficking, or perhaps something even worse. Whatever it was happening right behind my back every single day, obstructed from public view by only a single locked wooden door. Over time, the regular patrons of the pool started getting much more friendly with me, especially the people wearing the blue wristbands. These strangers began learning my actual name, and I went from solely collecting entry money to collecting massive cash tips, friendly high fives, and warm greetings every single day. As the people got more and more comfortable around me, they started talking openly right in front of my stand. They would stand by the edge of the pool and have long conversations in Spanish, completely assuming that I had no idea what they were saying. I would catch major pieces of their conversations, and let us just say that all of my worst suspicions were quickly confirmed. They were openly discussing drug shipments, cash drops, and police patrols. Admittedly, the massive amount of extra cash tips I was receiving made overlooking the illegal activity much easier for me. Plus, I kept telling myself that my hands were completely clean. I was being legally employed to perform a specific job, which was lifeguarding, and that was exactly what I was doing. Speaking of the job, I actually had to rescue a drowning child a few days later. It was not anything overly heroic, just a young kid who had strayed a bit too far into the deep end of the pool and clearly did not know how to swim. But when I pulled him out and returned to the surface of the water, everyone around the pool area stood up and gave me a massive standing ovation. It was a really unique, incredible feeling. After that incident, Jefe actually came down from his office in the hotel and thanked me personally for doing such an amazing job. He looked incredibly emotional, and he told me that he owed me his life. I did not fully understand what he meant by that until Esteban later whispered to me that the little boy I had saved was actually Jefe's only son. The very next day, Jefe, Esteban, and a bunch of other regular guys, some of whom I recognized as the frequent blue wristband wearers, were all waiting at the pool gate to greet me. They were holding a bottle and glasses of wine. They wanted to toast me. That obviously felt great, but the good feeling did not last long. After everyone raised their glasses to me, one of the older men made a loud toast in Spanish. I do not remember what was said word for word, but it was not a pleasant speech at all. He was basically toasting to the massive amounts of money their operation was making, and to all the lives they were successfully destroying with their product. Everyone in the group laughed loudly and drank their wine, but that was the exact moment that made me realize I had gotten completely addicted to something seriously insidious. No amount of money or tips should have ever justified me staying at that hotel for as long as I had, and yet, regrettably, I had stayed. The very next afternoon, my mother called me while I was sitting on my lifeguard stand. Now, I am not going to get into our family history, but my mother, rest her soul, was the kind of woman who never called me unless it was something incredibly important. So, I knew I had to answer the call immediately. I climbed down from my stand and walked over to what I thought was a completely private, quiet little concrete alcove near the back of the building so I could have some privacy. My mother only spoke fluent Spanish, so naturally, I had to speak to her in Spanish. I do not even remember what she called me about that day. What I do vividly remember is that after hanging up the phone and turning around to head back to the pool, Esteban was standing directly in my path, staring at me with a cold, dead expression. He did not look anything like the friendly, laughing guy I had met on my very first day at the pool. After a long, agonizingly awkward pause, he looked me dead in the eyes and asked me exactly how long I had known how to speak Spanish. I immediately tried to play dumb. I stammered out that I was just practicing a few words with a friend on the phone, because I wanted to learn the language. But I knew instantly that he saw right through my lies. He just stood there, keeping his eyes locked onto mine, looking like he was actively contemplating what to do with me. My heart started racing incredibly fast, and I felt this intense wave of fear. I was completely convinced that he was debating whether or not to physically harm me right then and there to protect their secret. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, he just quietly said, "Okay." He turned around and walked back toward the hotel. I immediately went right back up to my lifeguard post. I desperately debated packing my bag and leaving right then, but I simply could not force myself to get out of the chair. I was terrified that if I left early, they would take it as an immediate sign of guilt. I felt like I was failing a test. They probably knew where I lived from my employment paperwork. Those were the terrifying thoughts racing through my mind as I sat there, praying for my life, completely frozen to that plastic chair. A few minutes before my shift was scheduled to end, Esteban walked back up to my stand. He did not look angry anymore. He actually smiled, handed me a tip of a couple $100s in cash, and told me to make sure I arrived an hour early the following day. He said Jefe had a brand new, highly lucrative business opportunity to offer me. Then, he turned and walked back inside the hotel doors. When I left the hotel grounds that evening, I never returned. There was absolutely no way I was going back there. That situation had absolutely no good ending for me. I do not think I was ever actively followed home by them. But for several months after that, I was a complete paranoid wreck. Every single dark van or suspicious-looking car that parked on my street freaked me out. And there were so many nights where I just stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the danger I had been in. Even after all these years, there are still things about that job that I do not fully understand. They were obviously moving illegal drugs, I get that. But why they even needed a lifeguard on payroll at all was something I never quite figured out. My absolute best guess was that they just needed a legitimate employee on paper who could act like a completely clueless, innocent bystander if the local police ever decided to drop by and ask questions. Who really knows? I still think to this day that I was incredibly close to losing my life, as unlikely as that may seem to anyone else hearing this story. But I am telling you, the cold way Esteban was glaring at me in that alcove, there was only one thing on his mind. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. If there is one thing modern technology has taught us, it is that home safety is fragile. Doorbell cameras are meant to give us peace of mind, letting us see packages or arriving friends. But sometimes they capture deeply unsettling things, revealing hidden dangers lurking right outside. These cameras show that having a suspicious stranger show up at your house at night is far more common than most of us want to believe. For example, one quiet night, a homeowner was awakened by a notification on his phone. Looking at his doorbell camera feed, he saw a man walking up his porch steps. The man was holding a plastic bag and a roll of toilet paper. It was obvious that something was wrong. His movements were twitchy and erratic, and he looked incredibly nervous. It was clear he was under the influence of a heavy drug like meth. The homeowner kept the door locked and spoke through the intercom, asking how he could help. The man on the porch had a blank, confused look, his pupils completely dilated from being heavily intoxicated. When the homeowner asked for his name, the man struggled to put his thoughts together, finally saying his name was James. When asked who he was looking for, James froze, trying to invent a story. He mumbled the name Sosa, then added Sammy like the baseball player. The homeowner did not waste time. He told James no friend of his lived there, and that he had a Glock ready if James did not get off his porch immediately. The threat of force worked, and James quickly turned around and left, leaving the homeowner safe. But while some encounters involve confused individuals, others are highly coordinated and incredibly dangerous. In another neighborhood, a home security camera caught something straight out of a nightmare. 3 masked men, all dressed in dark clothing, slowly crept up to a front door in the dead of night. The man in the lead was heavily armed, carrying what appeared to be an assault rifle. He was not there to knock or ask questions. He was preparing to break in and rob the residence. As the lead gunman got close to the door, he noticed the camera. He quickly reached out with his gloved hand and covered the lens, trying to block the view. But even though the camera was covered, the suspects made a critical mistake. Their body language, caught just before the lens was blocked, showed a lot of hesitation. The gunman with the assault rifle seemed to realize they had already been spotted. He started to back away, but one of his accomplices behind him motioned for him to go back and keep trying. Eventually, realizing they lost the element of surprise, they fled. Sometimes, the threat does not come from a random criminal, but from someone you actually know. A viewer submitted a highly disturbing video where a man is seen standing on a front porch, muttering and cursing to himself. He stood there for 15 straight minutes, pacing back and forth. The backstory is terrifying. Not long before this, a member of the homeowner's family had been viciously attacked and mauled by a pack of aggressive dogs, suffering at least 12 bite wounds. The man on the porch was the owner of those dogs. Instead of showing remorse, the dog owner was furious that the family was holding him accountable. He stood on their porch, ranting about how people did not understand things. He muttered that he never denied his dogs bit her, but he was angry that the neighbors wanted to put his dogs to sleep over what he called a simple dog bite. He even made a chilling statement, asking when he had ever threatened her, while pointing out that he knew exactly where she lived. He continued his angry, unstable rant until the police finally arrived to deal with him. Another terrifying incident shows why you must always pay attention to your surroundings. A young couple was walking back to their house after an evening out. They had no idea that a man and a woman wearing wigs had been following them for blocks. The couple made it to their front step and were about to open the door when the male suspect ran up behind them. He pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at the back of their heads. Fortunately, the couple reacted instantly. They scrambled inside their house and slammed the door shut, locking it just in time. The two attackers, realizing they had lost their chance, did not seem bothered. In fact, they laughed as they ran back to their getaway car. Just minutes after this failed attempt, they successfully robbed another person at gunpoint. Thankfully, their luck ran out. The next day, after the doorbell footage was broadcast on the news, a viewer recognized the male gunman and turned him in to the police. Sometimes, criminals try to use authority to gain access to a home. In an apartment complex, a man walked up to a door and knocked loudly. He began shouting that he was the police, hoping the resident would open up without thinking. But as he looked around, he noticed the doorbell camera pointing right at him. His face fell. He realized his disguise and his actions were being recorded in high definition. To try and cover his tracks, he muttered that he was at the wrong room and quickly walked away, hoping the excuse would save him. But perhaps the most chilling home invasion occurred on September 14th, 2022, in Virginia. An elderly couple was spending a quiet evening at home when two armed, masked men burst through their door. They had no regard for the couple's age or vulnerability. They held them at gunpoint and ordered them to get into a closet. The elderly woman was terrified, not just for herself, but for her husband. She pleaded with the robbers, explaining that her husband had recently undergone hip surgery and could not move quickly. The elderly man struggled to stand, doing his best to cooperate so they would not shoot them. He slowly made his way to the closet, feeling completely helpless. Once the couple was locked inside, the robbers moved with disturbing speed and precision. They knew exactly what they wanted. One of them grabbed a heavy safe, while the other took a wallet and the couple's cell phones. Inside that safe was tens of thousands of dollars. The money did not belong to the elderly couple, but to another individual who was staying at their residence. The fact that the robbers went straight for the safe made it clear that this was a targeted tip-off. Someone who had been inside the house, perhaps a contractor, a healthcare worker, or a casual visitor, had seen the safe and shared the information with the criminals. Police launched an intense investigation and quickly identified the two suspects as 25-year-old Mitchell Boney Jr. and 22-year-old Tyree Demons Boney Jr. Mitchell Boney Jr. eventually turned himself in to the police. He was charged with armed burglary, use of a firearm, abduction, and conspiracy to commit burglary. However, Tyree Demons Boney Jr. went on the run and managed to evade capture. The incident left the elderly couple deeply traumatized, showing how quickly a peaceful evening can turn into a nightmare. and how dangerous it is when the wrong people gain information about your home. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. Ouija boards have long been sold in toy aisles next to harmless board games, marketed as a fun way to spend a Friday night with friends. The setup is simple: a wooden or plastic board covered in letters, numbers, and the words yes and no. A small heart-shaped piece of wood called a planchette sits in the center. Players place their fingers lightly on the glass window, ask a question, and wait for a spirit to guide their hands. For most, it is just a silly game, a trick where someone secretly pushes the plastic piece to make their friends scream. But for others, the board is not a toy at all. It is a doorway. And once that doorway is opened, whatever walks through cannot easily be sent back. And so, we start with our first story. It takes us to a quiet neighborhood where a mother and her daughter, Katrina Livingston, were dealing with an unimaginable loss. They had just lost their beloved family dog. But this was not a normal loss. The dog had been brutally killed and dismembered by the mother's husband, Paul Carroll. When police arrested Paul, his defense was deeply unsettling. He claimed that during a previous Ouija board session, a dark entity had entered their home and possessed the family pet. He insisted he had no choice but to destroy the animal to stop the evil inside it. Paul was quickly sentenced for causing unnecessary suffering to an animal, but the nightmare was far from over. Grieving and desperate for answers, Katrina and her mother decided to use the Ouija board themselves one night to contact their deceased pet. During the session, their neighbor Donna Sobey revealed that Katrina confessed something chilling. The board had predicted that the mother and daughter would both die very soon. Mere hours after the board made its grim prediction, a massive fire engulfed their home in flames. Both were left critically ill, fighting for their lives in the hospital. Fast forward to another case, this time in Delaware, at the prestigious St. Andrew's boarding school. This was a private boarding school known for its excellent reputation, not paranormal activity. But one night, a group of 4 teenage boys decided to break curfew. They snuck out of their dorms and walked deep into the dark woods. They brought candles, a flat surface, and a Ouija board they had smuggled in. They set up the board, lit the candles, and began to play. They took it completely seriously, trying not to make a joke of it. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, one of the boys asked if anything bad would happen in his future. Slowly, the piece began to move, spelling out the words "right now." Suddenly, a boy named Ferlin Moo began twitching and jerking his arms and head. He turned to the boy next to him with a devilish stare, lunged at him, and screamed that he did not know him. The other boys grabbed Ferlin, and he shortly passed out. They carried him back to his dorm room and left him in his bed. The next morning, Ferlin showed no signs of remembrance of the night. They took him to the nurse, but she had no explanation for what had occurred. But the problem was, these bizarre incidents were not limited to schools. In our third case, a young boy of about 12 or 13 was spending the night at his friend Michael's house. They were goofing around with an old Ouija board, along with Michael's sister in their dark basement. At first they laughed and accused each other of moving the piece. But then they asked the question, "Where are you?" The planchette immediately began to move, spelling out a sentence. "I can see you through the window." The 3 kids stopped playing, suddenly feeling very uneasy. The basement had a small, narrow window that looked out into the pitch-black backyard and woods. Even though they knew they could not see anything through the glass, they all slowly turned their heads to look anyway. And then they heard it. A loud, violent knocking sound coming from the outside of the basement window at 11:30 at night. The kids screamed in pure terror until Michael's dad came rushing downstairs. He took them outside with the backyard lights on to search for anyone, but as soon as they told him about what the board had written, the dad quickly ushered them inside and told them to go to bed. That was when he stopped believing they were just making it up. At this point, we look at cases where the physical reaction is so severe that medical professionals have to intervene. In 2014, in a small village called San Juan in southwest Mexico, 3 young friends were taken to the hospital. Alexandra Huerta, who was 22, was playing the game with her brother Sergio and their cousin Fernando Quaz. Within minutes of starting, Alexandra began to growl and thrash around in a trance-like state. Soon after, Sergio and Fernando began to show signs of possession, including feelings of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. Alexandra's parents called paramedics after a local Catholic priest refused to perform an exorcism because they were not regular churchgoers. Paramedics were called, and transferring them was highly complicated due to their erratic and involuntary movements. They had to restrain Alexandra to prevent her from hurting herself before treating the three with painkillers, anti-stress medication, and eye drops. The safety director said they spoke of feeling numbness, double vision, muscle spasms, and difficulty swallowing. The treatment eventually worked, but the terror was very real. And then, there are times when the board predicts a tragedy that happens almost instantly. On a cold, rainy night, three brothers were using a Ouija board in their dining room while their parents were out. They set up the board on the table, dimmed the lights, and began asking typical questions. They started with basic questions, but received no response. Then they asked if anyone was there, and the planchette slowly moved to yes. The boys then asked when they would die, and the board formed a chilling sentence. Death comes now. Only minutes later, they received a disturbing phone call. It was their father crying hysterically. He told them that he had swerved off the road into a tree, and their mother had died on impact. The father later blamed himself for driving without enough sleep, but he also claimed that right before the crash, he thought he saw a mysterious dark figure standing in the middle of the road, causing him to swerve on the slippery street and lose control of the vehicle. The brothers were left with the haunting realization that their dark question had been answered immediately, leaving their family completely shattered in a matter of minutes. Our final story took place on December 15, 2013. Frank and Sarah Piscatelli, along with their friend Joe Pennon, were in their basement playing with a Ouija board. A recent event motivated them to try it. Apparently, Frank and Sarah's grandmother had contacted her dead husband just days before she passed away using a board. The siblings wanted to contact their grandmother, so they brought Joe along to bring more energy. Instead of contacting their grandmother, they allegedly contacted a demon who introduced itself as Zozo. Instead of answering questions, the board spelled out random answers. Frank demanded that the demon let them speak to their grandmother, and that was when the lights clicked off. The power did not go out. They all heard the physical light switch flick off from the bottom of the stairs. Joe grabbed a flashlight and shined it over to the bottom of the stairs. For a brief moment, he saw a black figure standing by the light switch. Even in the flashlight beam, the figure was completely black. Just as suddenly, the lights turned back on and the figure was gone. They ran upstairs and locked the basement door. They agreed the black figure resembled their late grandmother. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya. 10 years ago, my friends and I were typical 13-year-olds living on the same block. Back then, there were far fewer houses and much more dense woods. I had 3 close friends, Mark, James, and Matt. On one Saturday night, we decided to go out for some classic ding-dong ditching. Mark or James would run up to the houses and ring the doorbells, while Matt and I would find hiding spots. We hit about 5 or 6 houses. The reactions were pretty standard. Homeowners would step onto the porch, yell, and slam the door. For a couple of houses, we went back and rang the bell again just for a bigger reaction. One man was so angry, he yelled that he was calling the police. The second his front door shut, we all panicked. We bolted down the street and headed over to the next block. And so, we ended up on the next block. This part of the neighborhood was much less developed, with patches of woods surrounding some of the properties. The first house we approached was across from a thick patch of woods, which made for a perfect hiding spot. The house was rundown with tall grass, a ratty old car covered in a dusty tarp, and a neglected look. Mark volunteered to go up and ring the bell. He walked across the street and pushed the button. But he barely had time to make it across the street before the front door swung wide open. It was another man who answered. This guy was absolutely massive, about 6 feet tall and stocky. Unlike the others, he was furious immediately. He walked all the way out into his front yard, checking behind his bushes and yelling threats. We were hiding in the woods, laughing silently. Eventually, the man went back inside and slammed his door. But Mark was feeling bold. He waited a few minutes, checked the windows, and then ran back up the steps to ring the bell for a second time. Mark knew he did not have much time, so he ran around to the side of the house out of sight. The front door opened much quicker this time, and the man came out holding a rifle. We looked at each other in the dark woods and whispered, "Oh shit." The man marched down the steps. He checked behind his car, looked behind a couple of trees, and then stood in the center of his lawn, completely still. He slowly turned his head, scanning the area, and his eyes stopped on us. Matt, James, and I froze, ducking as low as we could. After about 10 seconds of staring in our direction, the man finally went back inside, but then we saw him appear at his front window, standing like a statue, staring directly at us. But then the silence was broken. We heard Mark's voice screaming at the top of his lungs, "Run!" We did not understand what was happening until we heard the heavy rustling of leaves and branches coming from right behind us. We turned our heads, and our hearts stopped. It was the massive man. He had sneaked out his back door, circled around into the woods, and was now running up from behind us with his rifle raised and pointed directly at us. We scrambled to our feet, running like prey from a predator. We bolted out of the woods toward Mark, who was waiting for us across the street. We ran for several blocks until we were absolutely sure we had lost him. Mark later explained that he saw the man sneak into the woods to ambush us. We were so terrified that we never reported him to the police. Luckily, that house was many blocks away, so we never had to go near it again. But it was a harsh lesson in how quickly a childish prank can turn deadly. Fast forward to my college years, when I ended up living in a house that I can only describe as a living hell. At the time, I was a university student, and my parents were paying the rent for a small house for me to live in. I know that sounds spoiled, and I was incredibly grateful. The house itself was modest, nothing fancy. And for the first few days, I was absolutely thrilled. It felt like the ultimate freedom. But that feeling did not last long, because things quickly started to get very strange. It all began on a gray, rainy Saturday afternoon. While watching television in the living room, I suddenly heard a distinct scraping sound coming from the hardwood floor. I sat up and looked around, thinking that maybe a wild animal had somehow gotten inside the house, but the room was completely empty. I tried to shake it off, sat back down, and resumed watching. Later that night, around midnight, I perked up when I thought I heard a strange noise from the kitchen. I grabbed a throw pillow as some sort of weapon and cautiously walked over. There, in the middle of the dark kitchen floor, was a box of Cheerios. The box was completely tipped over, and hundreds of tiny cereal pieces were spilled out across the floor. As I was sweeping them up, I heard a very distinct creak, like the sound weak areas of a wooden floor make when someone steps on them. The sound came from right by the kitchen table. I quickly looked up, but there was absolutely nobody. I finished cleaning up and went back to watching TV, eventually drifting off into an hour-long nap on the couch. The next day was normal, but on the next rainy day, the strange occurrences started up again. I woke up in my bed feeling sicker than I had ever felt in my life. It felt as though I had been out drinking heavy alcohol all night. Even though I had not touched a drop, I was incredibly nauseous, weak, and dizzy. Because of how awful I felt, I stayed in bed all day with a garbage pail right next to my bed in case I needed to throw up. At around midday, I suddenly heard a very distinct sound coming from directly above me in the attic. The attic door was in my bedroom ceiling. It was not just a single thud, it was 3 or 4 heavy footsteps. Despite the fact that every time I moved, I wanted to puke, I managed to force myself out of bed. I pulled the string to the attic door down, grabbed an old metal baseball bat, and climbed the steps. I pulled the light switch cord to illuminate the space, but there were only some old boxes. I climbed back down quickly because the cramped attic made me incredibly uneasy, but the noises did not stop. That night I woke up to a sound that I initially mistook for thunder. I was still feeling incredibly sick. Then the familiar, heavy thud echoed from up in the attic, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I pulled the string to the attic door down once again, grabbed my baseball bat, and climbed the steps into the darkness. To build up my own courage, I yelled out demanding to know who was up there. But before I could reach for the light cord, the silence of the pitch-black attic was broken by a child giggling right in front of me. I was out of that house so fast I don't even remember running. I called my dad in the cold rain and asked him to pick me up. We packed everything up the next day and I moved back home. I know it was really paranormal. Several years ago, when I was 20, I took a job working as a housemaid for an elderly woman named Mel. She lived in a massive, ancient house on a secluded property. The land was about 2 acres, surrounded by thick woods in 3 directions, with a road on the other. If the property had been taken care of, it could have been beautiful, but instead, it was overgrown, neglected, and eerie. The house itself was extremely old, constructed of dark wood, and the interior was perpetually dim. For some reason, she insisted on keeping the blinds tightly shut. Whenever I opened them during the day to let sunlight in, she would close them again. To make things even creepier, she preferred to light several of the rooms using only candles, which made the inside of the house feel prehistoric. And of course, the floors creaked loudly with every single step. Mel was around 70 years old. Most of the work she had me do consisted of physical tasks she could no longer manage, like sweeping, dusting, washing dishes, doing laundry, and sorting mail. One weekend, Mel asked me to sleep there for a night or 2 to help. The house had 4 bedrooms, yet she lived alone, so it was not an issue. I arrived on Friday, speaking few words to her. I dropped my backpack in my assigned bedroom. As I turned, I saw Mel standing in the doorway. She had a creepy way about her, and this was no exception. She did not say hello or ask how my drive was. Instead, she coldly instructed me to clean the guest bedroom immediately, and then ordered me to straighten up the rest of the house. Once she gave her orders, she turned and walked slowly upstairs to her own bedroom. I did not see her again for the rest of the afternoon, but as I worked downstairs, the silence of the house made every noise she made upstairs sound extremely loud. I could hear her heavy, slow footsteps pacing back and forth across her bedroom ceiling. It sounded like she was walking in circles from one end of her room to the other, over and over again. It was incredibly strange, especially since there were no televisions, radios, or books in the house. I had no idea what she could possibly be doing up there for hours on end in the dark, but the weirdest part of the house was the basement. From the very beginning, Mel made it absolutely clear that the basement was completely off limits. She warned me in a very serious tone that I was never, under any circumstances, to go down there. Nighttime finally arrived, and because I was exhausted, and there was absolutely nothing else to do, I decided to just go to bed early. This was back before everyone had smartphones, so I did not have any screen to look at to pass the time. I did not even know the exact hour, but I guessed it was probably around 9 or 10 o'clock. For the first few hours, the entire house was completely silent, except for the occasional creaking of the old wood settling in the wind. However, I found it almost impossible to actually fall asleep because the mattress was incredibly stiff, lumpy, and uncomfortable. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, staring up at the dark ceiling, feeling incredibly uneasy. It felt like hours had passed when I started hearing footsteps outside my room on the creaky floors. It sounded like Mel was passing my room really slowly. Maybe she was just going to the bathroom. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps again, but then she stopped outside my door this time. I sat up and listened. I could hear the creaking from behind the door of Mel standing there, and it was starting to creep me out. She finally walked away. I heard her go down the stairs, and then I heard a door open and close from downstairs. I had a feeling it was the basement door. A long time passed before I heard the basement door open and close again, and then heavy, slow footsteps coming up the creaky stairs. The footsteps once again came to my door, then stopped. I sat up once again to listen, and I could hear creaks of pressure on the floor outside the door, and then I heard the doorknob start to turn. I laid back down and pulled the sheets over me and pretended to be asleep. I heard Mel take a few steps into the room, pause, and then leave. She went back to her room and shut the door. I was a bit disturbed. I waited in the dark for about half an hour, making sure her door stayed closed, before deciding I absolutely had to see what was in that basement. My curiosity had completely taken over. I slowly got out of the rickety bed, tiptoed to my bedroom door, and then tiptoed down the stairs the best I could, trying to avoid the loudest creaks in the wood. I reached the bottom of the stairs, opened the heavy basement door, flipped on the light switch, and crept down the steps into the cool, musty air. I made it to the very bottom step, and immediately had to force myself to hold in a loud scream. There were 2 old wooden chairs sitting dead center in the middle of the concrete floor. and in those chairs were two of what I could only describe as decaying human corpses. They had synthetic wigs placed on their heads. The horrific sight of a bug crawling out of the eye socket of one of them made me want to throw up right there. I brought myself to walk deeper into the basement, closer to the corpses. I had to make sure they were real. Both of the corpses had men's wigs on them. The bigger of the two also had a beret on. I don't know much about corpses or their rate of decaying, but I'd say these corpses were both almost a year old. I felt like my heart stopped momentarily when I heard footsteps coming from upstairs, on the first floor. I couldn't make it to the light switch. I had no time. I hid behind one of the couches in the basement as I heard slow, heavy footsteps coming down one creaky stair at a time. I had my hands covering my mouth as I heard Mel reach the last stair. I heard her whisper my name. For half a second, I looked around the couch and saw Mel halfway across the basement already, with a big kitchen knife in her hand. I knew she would be too slow to catch me, so I ran for it to the stairs. She screamed my name and followed as fast as she could. When I made it to the first floor of the house, I ran upstairs to the bedroom I was sleeping in to grab my backpack. By the time I ran back downstairs, Mel was at the top basement step. I ran out the front door and to my car. I turned the key, caught my breath, looked back toward the front door of the big old house, and saw Mel standing there in the porch light holding the knife. I drove off the property and down the dark road, making it back to the safety of my home within 10 minutes. Fortunately, since I had only worked for her for a couple of weeks, I had never given Mel any of my personal information, such as my home address or my phone number, so she was never able to contact me again. If I had to guess, I would say one of those corpses belonged to her dead husband that she had mentioned twice to me during my time working there. As for the other smaller corpse, I have absolutely no idea, and I am not sure I want to know. It was a deeply disturbing scene to witness, and it became clear that something was incredibly wrong with that woman, leaving me with questions that will haunt me forever. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.